Oh, okay, so I just need to give you, sorry about that.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to our Provo Municipal Council meeting for February 4th, 2020. We're here at the City Center Municipal Council Chambers at 5:40 p.m. at 351 West Center, Provo, Utah. And this meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The council requests that attendees help maintain the decorum of the meeting by silencing electronic devices, being respectful to others, and refraining from applause or other outbursts during the proceedings of the meeting. I'll begin with a roll call.
Cliff Strachan.
Brian Jones.
Dave Sewell.
Shannon Ellsworth.
David Shipley.
George Handley.
David Harding.
Travis Hoban.
Bill Fillmore.
And Mayor Kafusi.
All right, thank you. Our opening prayer will be offered by Dixon Holmes, after which we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance by Paul McGuire.
Our dear kind Heavenly Father, as we gather this evening in this municipal council meeting with elected officials and interested residents, we pray for thy Spirit to be here, and that a spirit of civility and of interest might be shared, and that all that would be here this evening would be mindful of the decisions that our elected officials will be making on our behalf, and pray for them to have wisdom, but as participants that also might be respectful of each other and to recognize the many blessings and benefits and responsibilities that we have living here in this great city of Provo, and for the many blessings that thou hast bestowed upon this community. We are thankful for these and give thanks in thy Son's name, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Invite everybody to stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will begin with a presentation of the Citizens Connect. This will be introduced by Mayor Michelle Kafusi.
Good evening, and thank you for giving us a few minutes to speak. It's the year 2020, and every year as the mayor, people ask you, what are you going to do? And even though we've got big projects and new buildings coming, that was last year. They all want to know what's this year. So I got together with my team and we came up with a new concept called Citizen Connect, and I decided to call this the Year of Communication. So I am going to introduce my PIO, Nicole Martin. It was her brainchild, and she wrapped her arms around this and ran with this direction, and she's got a lot of great and good Citizen Connect messaging to give out tonight. So Nicole.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, thank you for having me here tonight. I don't want to take too much time. I know you have a full meeting, but feel free to stop me and ask any questions that you'd like answered right away. I don't know if any of you have watched this, and I would suggest if you have some time to do it. There's a great TEDx video called For the Love of Cities by a gentleman, I'm not going to pronounce it, Peter Kageyama, but it's For the Love of Cities. And what he talks about is it's not enough to run a city. How do you create a community, and how do you inject pride in community through the various little things that you do? And it's very fascinating. He calls them love letters in a city. And that can be something as simple as having little bronze mice in your downtown that create an experience for a family as they're coming to shop. It can be something little like that. So in the mailbox of every Provo resident, they received this last week. And it is a Citizen Connect packet. And I would like to think of that as our love letter to each one of our citizens, because it really is meant to say one thing, and that is that you matter to us, that you understanding what is happening in the government by which you pay for is important to us, and that is the message that we wanted to send with this packet. So you'll notice first and foremost, there is a new mark or a logo that goes with this, and it is very intentional. I think it's very clear that you immediately think of the "you are here." That is the emoji, so to speak, for this. We're all familiar when we've been in a mall. I also like the fact that it illustrates ripples of interest, so the kind of concentric ripples rolling out. So the blue dot is their home. This is what matters the most to them. This is what affects them the most. And then kind of moving outward, their neighborhood, and then their city. And so that is what matters, and that's how we ought to be communicating, is what matters to those we're communicating to. My hope is that this Citizen Connect packet helps increase city pride, help people feel involved and connected, that their voice is heard, and that what they care about matters, because we're not only informing them, but we're listening and we're making adjustments accordingly. So I would like to this next 4 steps is the why determined the what in this. Let me tell you about the 4 goals that we had when Mayor Kafusi brought me onto the city. It's been about 6 months. The primary goal was, how can we continually improve city communications? Never stopping, always looking at how we can improve. So that sort of brought out 4 goals, and this is the why, and then we'll get to the what. So the first was, how do we reach more residents? Some interesting statistics that I pulled from the Pew Research Center. 19% is what I want you to remember. When asked if they could think of anything good that their government had done to push out information, only 19% could think of a good instance where their government had effectively put out information for them. 19% could think of something bad. So I would look at the 19% that thought of something bad, but perhaps more importantly, the ones that didn't respond at all. The ones that are completely either apathetic or just don't know what's going on in the government that's meant to serve them. Another question asked if the government was sharing more information or less information. 7% said less information, 39% said don't know. And I get again back to the apathy that often accompanies cities, and not because they don't care, but because they don't have time. They're busy lives. And so this is the challenge to overcome. So the solution for this, to meet this goal, was we mailed this to every home. And the reason for that is simple. We have people that follow us on our social media channels. Of course, we have about 25,000 that follow us on our Facebook. You all know the population of our city. We're speaking to maybe a quarter, if that, and they're not seeing everything we post. So we've got to have a variety of ways to talk to them and let them choose what works for them. So in order for them to choose what works for them, we need them to see all of the possibilities. And that is the reason for this being a mailed piece, is because that is the only way we can get to every single home and let them know all of the ways in which we want to have a conversation with them. So the second goal, encourage engagement. We always think online is the end-all be-all, when in fact that's not always the case. Depending on what service they needed solved, you'll see here 40% or 46% went online. In this instance, 55% were offline. So again, the channels have to run the spectrum. We have to have both online and offline. So I like to think of these as customizable conversations. When you open this packet, you may immediately think 3 of these are not going to work for you, and maybe 4 do. So you decide in your customizable toolbox how you want to be informed about your city. The challenge that we need to overcome is busy lives. The way we can overcome that is by making it as convenient for all of our citizens to understand what's going on as possible. So we as government need to do it better, always better, and that's in developing a variety of communication channels. And what you'll notice in here is we're showcasing many that we've had, we're introducing a couple of new ones, and then we're going to do a better job with a couple that we've had around that maybe have gone by the wayside a bit. You'll notice, You'll notice I've put a couple of responses that we've already gotten from this packet, and I liked this one in that she already went and liked a half dozen more city-related Facebook pages. So in just that one comment, we have a person, a citizen, that feels more connected. For me, that's a win. Let's go on to the next. Next is depth of conversation. I like to think of 2 different audiences. Some are just simply information seekers. They have busy lives, but they want to know what's going on. They want it to be quick and easy for them to find out. And then we have those that are citizen analysts, and they're a gem, they're a find. When you find a citizen who wants to go to more depth, and wants to understand, maybe wants to criticize. We welcome that scrutiny because it helps us get better. And so we need to provide channels and information that hit all of those spectrums of audiences and citizens that we have. So the challenge to overcome in this case, an interest level. And so we then, through our various channels, create a citizen-chosen experience. And I liked this example where one had noticed that we wrote an article about recycling and then had gone to a business and asked, or I think it was a school actually, asked if they had recycling bins. And I love this. This was a person that took the reading that they did in the newsletter and actually took it an additional 2 or 3 steps. I would call that more than an information seeker and someone that just wants to really make our community a better place. And then I think one of the most important, and this gets back to my love letters, is community pride. Yes, we are communicating, but we're communicating for a purpose. And I loved this quote. She talks about the fact that she received the packet and says, "I love this so much because of how it makes me feel like I really belong to a community that cares about its citizens." I feel like I could end the presentation right there because that is the goal, that is the hope, that is the purpose of this packet, is that we create community pride, that everybody is proud to be in Provo. So just in quick, what is Citizen Connect? It is simply all of the channels we use to communicate to our residents. And as I mentioned, we showcase existing ones, highlight new ones, and encourage all to participate where they would like to. I've explained some of our goals, but of course transparency, something that government is always criticized about. How do we educate? How do we encourage them to participate? How do we persuade them? That's the purposes and the goals behind the channels. And then we're not just interested in communicating to. We want to have a conversation with our residents, and that includes listening and admitting fault and making adjustments accordingly. Go ahead. And the beauty of this is we got all of that, a customizable toolbox for our residents for the same communications costs that we were spending. So we just simply, in order to solve or to meet the goals that we had set forward, we simply swapped one project. You'll be familiar with the Involved magazine for this new project. So now we are accomplishing these goals with a different project. Go ahead. So, Mayor mentioned the year of communications. What does that mean for our citizens? I hope that means that they feel like they're having a conversation with us, that we're not only encouraging but listening to their feedback, that they have variety and choice in how they learn about our government, and that we are doing storytelling. I have been amazed to hear how many wonderful, just human interest stories we have in this city, and I would love to tell more of those because, again, that is what makes us want to live in Provo. That's what makes this a community and not just a city. This is the introduction piece that is in the Citizen Connect packet, and it breaks all of our communications channels into 3 categories: person-to-person, print, and digital. And the first thing that they see is, in fact, a magnet. I love that 24/7, this is up on their fridge, at least I hope it is, or someplace very convenient, and that they know that truly 24/7 Provo is available to them with any number of channels that they're choosing. With this magnet, and this is the one piece that we are looking at continuing annually, depending on how it has been received. So far, so good. These were the dates and information that we felt the residents wanted most. So this gets back to communicating how we think they want, or communicating what they want most. When I first did this piece, I had numbers for every department. I mean, it was so much information, too much information. Getting back to our mark where you looked at that blue circle right in the center, if we're looking at the things that matter most to our citizens, this is what we're talking about. Okay, next one. And then you have a string of sheets after that that just show the various channels. I wanted to talk with you just briefly about the concept of these, what I treated as ads. So every single one, because again, what we're competing with is the white noise of life. So if we want our messages to be heard, we have to look and package them in a way in which they will break through that white noise. So you'll notice each one of those sheets attempts to grab the attention with very strong visuals, very minimal copy, so that they can capture the essence of what we are kind of persuading. And then lastly, gives a call to action, show the benefits and give a call to action. So it encourages them to sign up for the e-blast, to sign up for a Provology class, to go to the mayor's blog, whatever it might be. Check out these channels, decide what works for you, and then make them your own. One thing we're bringing back is the monthly newsletter. So from now on, citizens will see in their utility bill, this is also accessible online for those that don't get your utility bill mailed, the new newsletter. And you'll notice it is on a very cost-effective print or paper, so very inexpensive. But the purpose is we were, as I mentioned earlier, doing a quarterly magazine. That doesn't really work when we need deadlines that have to get to our citizens every single month. So that's looking at what our citizens want and bringing in a channel that works better for that. So we make sure they're not missing any of that really important information. And monthly is just much easier to do that than a quarterly magazine. And then in this additional flyer, we also talk about the e-blast. So we've traditionally had an e-blast. We haven't used it a lot. I would like to see us use it much more effectively and more frequently, but not too much. So if you sign up, we will not inundate you, but it will be very pertinent, important information. When we had the fire on Thanksgiving, it was very interesting to note how important it is that we build up a following on our social media channels and that we have an e-blast in place. When I worked for Harriman City during the machine gun fire, having that direct, timely connection to your residents is so, so important. And in the course of a crisis, those are the only channels that work for that. And so that's, again, just beyond just daily communications. Crisis communications is another really important reason for us to maintain direct contact and relationships with our citizens. And then you'll notice a theme, 311. So Provo was, in fact, the 311 pioneer. I think the first to do it. I would say the best to do it so far. And the whole point of 311, again, is convenience to our residents. We don't want them to have to remember 10 different numbers. We don't want them to have to take 15 minutes out of their day and scroll through a website to find something when, in fact, all they need is 3 numbers. So we tried to reiterate that theme to make it, again, convenient for our citizens. Oh, sorry. I could talk more. Okay, and then we have all of our digital channels. I found it interesting to note, and it's not surprising, that the digital following is going up. When they did the government study in 2003, 44% of citizens contacted their government online or looked for information online. 2009, that went up to 61%, 2015, 65%, although the questions were a little different. Regardless, it is on an upward trend, but as I pointed out, traditional print is still important. Go ahead. And then these last two are events, and that's, again, something else. Again, speaking of love letters, I would call your Covey Center for the Arts one of those love letters. One of those aspects of this community that bring all of the citizens together through entertainment. And then one thing we're going to do differently, it is Provo's 170th birthday this year. She's holding up rather nicely. And so we would love to have a birthday party for her. And so we have, in fact, invited all of the citizens to join us, whether that's online or in person, for a bit of sugary cake to celebrate. And Provo is an amazing city. And so to be able to celebrate her 170th year is something that I hope we can all do together and enjoy. And then I'll just end with this quote. In today's world, getting someone's attention is the most valuable commodity there is, but it is a prerequisite for a conversation, and that is what we're looking to have, is a conversation with our citizens. Thank you. Have any questions?
How do you propose that we help inform and educate and communicate with citizens on the different roles of the mayor and the council? So I know the mayor gets a lot of emails that she can't necessarily control or help with, and maybe vice versa? What do you propose?
Yep. I totally think that's important. When I was in another city, we used an element or a campaign, ongoing campaign that we called Gov 101. And what I loved about that was it got back to the essentials and the fundamentals of government, of which the organization of a government or the form of government is one of those. In fact, essentially it's a white paper. So one thing that I would like to start is a series of white papers that gets back to the government essentials, because form of government is very essential to understanding your city's government. I mean, Harriman's government is completely different than Provo's government. Sandy's government is the same as Provo's government, but acts very differently in practice. And so, yes, that would be my suggestion. In fact, I had a really good conversation with Dave Decker today. You'll recall the presentation he gave on the aquifer. I think that's another really great topic, to understand the diminishing aquifer and what is Provo doing to try and combat that. So that would be my purpose for like a Gov 101, is to help educate on those really fundamental. And that gets back to those that want a deep dive, kind of those that are looking for a little bit more. Some won't care, but others it will be available. And we just put those online, create an archive of just really educational pieces that are quick.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Shannon.
Any other questions? Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you, Mayor, for this wonderful initiative. We're glad to have you on board in Provo, and
Thank you.
great to see the fruits of your efforts already. So thank you. I think
Thank you. I appreciate the time.
a great thing. All right, we will now move on to item number. We'll do approval of the minutes from January 7th. Are there any objections or requested changes to the minutes? If not, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Mr. Jones, would you read or describe the public comment period?
Yes, I'd be happy to. If you could go, John, if you could go back to that chart for a second. So as indicated on the screen, required public hearings will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. However, I would note that of the agenda items, only number 3 is actually a public hearing. The others are public meetings that will accept public comment. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During this public comment period, each speaker will be limited to 2 minutes. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda.
We have the agenda up visually so everyone's clear on what is on the agenda.
Then can you go back to the table?
Okay,
Right
there you go.
So despite the comments over in the column, items number 2 and 4 are not actually public hearings, but item number 3 is.
So any comments from the public on any item that does not appear on the agenda? All right. Oh, we do have one.
Pam Jones, one of the vice chairs of Edgemont Neighborhood. Yeah, I got the packet. The active brochure is okay. It's same as we've been getting, primarily about the recreational activities. We also got Connect, which is a revival of the old newsletter that used to come with the utility bill. But it's better, has more stuff in it, and there's not a whole page promoting the power department. I asked about that a couple of times before and was told, well, because Provo Power has more money than the other department so they can pay for the ad space. The magnet, handy, but it's only good for 2020. So do we have to do this again every year? And then we have the what amounts to a magazine, but the pages are not bound. They're just loose. They're posters, and they're very redundant in the information that they give. How many times do we have to see 311? Slick paper, most of them are one-sided, which is a waste of paper. What are we supposed to do with these? Wallpaper our bathrooms?
Mrs. Jones, 2 minutes has gone by and the clock didn't start, so if you could wrap it up, I'd appreciate it.
Okay,
Thank you.
I will. As far as the message of communication, that's fine. But I emailed or posted on this Open City Hall to all the council and the mayor. I heard from one council member, Mr. Hoban, and the mayor. She promised all my questions would be answered tonight. They weren't. Nicole talked about what and why and all that. She didn't talk about how much. Okay. How much information do we need to be told over and over and over again? And how much does it cost?
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Any other comments from the public on items that are not on our agenda? And for clarification, 2 minutes a person. Thank you.
I'll probably just be 1 minute. My name is Danelle. I used to live in Provo. I live in Orem now, but I've been very interested in trying to solve the homeless problem by changing the zoning laws to start a tiny house community somewhere in Provo that is land that already has water and sewer to help the homeless, to help there not be homeless people. My name is Danelle Bennett. So I would hope that someone would get my contact information so that I can try to get this rolling.
Ma'am, if you could give your contact information to the city recorder.
Oh, okay.
And she'll pass
Great.
it along.
Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. Any other public comment? All right, we will close the public comment period and turn to item number 2. Oh, another public, sorry.
Okay, my name is Peter Vogel. I'm living in Orem currently, and I spent the last 5 or 6 years living in Provo. And the proposal that's coming up tonight about the foothills, the project that's set in motion to develop the foothills, I would like to voice an opinion that I don't believe that that would be beneficial to the city.
We're gonna have time for public opinion on that, public input on that item in just a moment. But this is for any item that's not on the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
you may be getting to this, but I would propose that we move item 4 up.
Yes,
in
we
our
are.
agenda.
Yeah. So item number 4 will follow item number 2. So we'll start with item number 2, ordinance text amendment. Excuse me. Let's see. An ordinance amending Provo City Code relating to floor area ratio, setback, and buffer yard requirements in the research and business park zone. This has citywide application, and this will be presented by Dustin Wright, Provo City Planner.
Thank you. So the applicant has requested this ordinance amendment that would have effect over the zoning that's up in the Riverwoods Business Park area of Provo. And within that area, it's pretty built out. That zone was established 20 years ago. At this point, the applicant, I believe, is looking for the ability to attract more businesses there and to be able to have some flexibility. So their request is to amend the code to, the first part of it would be to remove the floor area ratio requirement there. Essentially, the floor area ratio is the comparison between the lot size and the building square footage. Staff's reviewed the application and the zone. Within the zone, there's some other provisions in there that we feel like will still be able to control the development within the zone as it's described. And so there's a open space requirement within the zone that would require that 40% of the lot is maintained as open space, and 60% would be for the building and for the parking. There's going to be the parking requirement also, and the building height requirement is still within that zone. So staff feels that there's still sufficient provisions if the floor area ratio requirement is removed. The second part of the request was to allow the Director of Development Services to be able to have some flexibility to reduce setback requirements within that zone. But there wasn't a minimum of what that could be. And so the recommendation there would be to kind of bring that up with the applicant tonight and see if there's a specific amount of flexibility they're looking for with setbacks within the zone. And then the Planning Commission has forwarded a positive recommendation for this, and that version, I believe, is included in your packet. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Any questions? All right, thank you. This is now open for any public comment, if anyone would like to address this item on the agenda.
My name is Mike Rohn. I'm a resident of Provo, and I've one of its neighborhood chairs. Our concern as a neighborhood chair is that businesses always have adequate parking so that all of their tenants, their people who generate income or occupy their space, and those who come to do business with them have adequate parking off-street, not to fill the neighborhoods with people coming to park to do business with them. We think it's good to have landscaping and to beautify our city, but we're really concerned that we still maintain adequate parking. We've an experience in our city where there's lots of businesses that don't have adequate parking, and it spills over into the neighborhoods and causes a major issue with residents. So as the city council looks to make an amendment dealing with the ratio of floor space to utilization of the rest of the lot, we'd like you to be very conscious of the need to maintain adequate parking for commercial spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Any discussion of this item? Okay. No. Is the applicant here, and would the applicant like to address the council? Okay. Any discussion on the council? Mr. Sewell?
I still had the question about that clause where the Development Services Director could adjust the setbacks. I've learned that sometimes people get touchy or concerned if a setback is reduced next to them, and so I kind of wanted to know what they were looking to do or what the limit on that might be. So I don't know if there's anyone here that can address that.
Mr. Wright?
So if we can jump back to the map of the area. So as far as the setbacks go, if they were reduced on one side, so currently in that zone, there's a 20-foot setback requirement around the property and 40-foot setback on the street side of the property. So if those were to be reduced, let's say 10 feet on one side They're still going to have to maintain the open space requirement and things of that nature. But within the area, if we can get the map up there, it can kind of take a look at what's surrounding that business park. But essentially, it's just other structures within that business park. Then there's trail along the side and the river. It's kind of separating the business park from other developments within the area. So looking at it, I don't see necessarily major concerns with allowing some flexibility to reduce a setback. But to what degree that is, I'm not exactly sure. That would be something maybe the applicant could provide more information on, or if the council had some suggestions there, we'd be happy to look into those and make sure we add something like that into the language.
Thank you. Mr. Harding.
Can we verify, is the applicant here tonight?
I'm not aware that they are.
Okay. And I've been in communication with you before, so just as part of the conversation with the council, just I wanted to mention I do have concerns with the latter portion of the proposal by the applicant, and I believe the applicant originally said, well, we'd like the reduction of this to be dependent on the director of development services, and for compatibility and whatnot, and staff is a little uncomfortable with kind of discretionary, and so the proposal that we have before us took that out. So it says that the setback and the buffer can be reduced based on these two things, which is now, basically that it doesn't violate things that it wouldn't be allowed to violate anyways, and there's no limit to how much it can be reduced. So basically, it's saying that the development services director can make the determination based on these two things, which generally should always be true unless there's easements or whatever. So basically, it's in effect eliminating the setbacks, and I don't think that was intentional. Since this is a first hearing, I do believe that it'd be best to have this go back, and since if the applicant's not here tonight, work with staff to develop if there is a specific proposal that's not so open-ended.
I have a question.
Yes.
For staff. The Planning Commission recommended including the term erosion control under number 5. Is there a reason that wasn't included?
Included in the applicant's version, or just when the zone was created?
Well, I think included it here as the applicant's version, and then I have below that the staff's version, which strikes 14A. And I'm looking at number 5 right there.
So the language that we sent over to the council staff should have the recommendation from the Planning Commission, which had the erosion control added into that.
Okay.
So that was brought up at the Planning Commission meetings prior to the staff report, or following the staff report.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's why it wasn't in the staff report.
Yeah, I would be interested in adopting some of their recommendations, specifically around erosion control.
Councilor Ellsworth, John, can you put up the version that's on base? Exhibit A, the actual ordinance, not the staff report. It appears to me if we're talking about in Exhibit A of that, if you go down to line 62, so this would be the one that you would be voting on, and it does have erosion control in it.
Oh, it does, okay. Can you tell me about the Planning Commission's discussion of whether this is redundant?
Yeah, so we discussed that, the Planning Commission, and their recommendation was that removing the floor area ratio was something that they'd be comfortable with recommending forward to the City Council. So, yeah, staff's presentation explained that we feel like the floor area ratio, along with the other provisions already in that zone, that there is that redundancy, and that there wouldn't be an issue taking that portion out.
They feel comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other discussion of this item? Yes, Mr.
Mr.
Fillmore.
Chairman, I feel to concur with Mr. Harding's comment that we ought to put some reasonable limits on that discretion.
Okay. Well, that's 2 votes for continuing this item specifically to address this concern. Any other discussion? So in the event, this is automatically continued to the next regularly scheduled meeting unless anyone would like to make a motion to put it on another date. So I will call for, no, we don't call for a vote on the implied motion because it has been continued. Thank you, Mr. Jones, who keeps me in line. Thank you, Mr. Wright. All right, we will now continue with item number 4. This is a public meeting regarding extending parking restrictions in the Foothills Permit Parking Area, and Ruth Eldridge Thomas, Foothills Chair, will present this to us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm presenting on behalf of several residents of my neighborhood who live specifically in the Nantucket condo complex, which I can show you is on facing 9th East, between about 900 and 950 North, and also a couple of residents who live in the, I don't have a pointer, but on that little red line, which is on 820 North. In this stretch of land, we have 3 different parking restrictions or areas of parking within about a block and a half of each other. There's an area with no parking restrictions, one with daytime parking restrictions, and one with nighttime parking restrictions. The upshot of this is that during the day, and often during the night, and even more during the evening, cars from people who largely don't live in the neighborhood are parked kind of fender to fender from 900 East all the way to Kiwanis Park in these open zones. The tenants along this stretch have reported 2 main areas of concern about this. One, that they're not able to park near their own homes on the street during the evening especially, and also some pretty significant safety concerns. There are a lot of kids that run in across the street in and out of cars. Also a lot of adults who cross to the...
Excuse me, sorry.
Sure.
I don't know if is that coming from outside? Okay.
It's the broadcast of the meeting for the people outside, so.
Oh, okay.
I think Elizabeth's turning it down at the moment.
You're hearing yourself.
Hearing myself. Better.
I was like, who's talking so loudly out
Right.
there?
It's usually me. So as you can see along this area, there are cars normally parked on both of those red lines. We have safety concerns of people trying to cross the street to the church, especially during the evening, and also an issue of cars, car owners parking on this side of the street and then jaywalking across 9th East at night to get to their residences in the apartment complexes normally on the other side of the street. I've also had a series of complaints about cars parking extremely close to the corner of 820 North and 900 East and impeding people's ability to turn onto that street. All of this, our goal for tonight is hoping to raise the issue of increasing and also streamlining the regulation along this area. The tenants have suggested, for example, that the area between from 900 East to the BYU greenhouse be enveloped into the foothill parking permit situation that already exists there. That's an area that currently has open parking and no homeowner. Well, there's only one house there, and it's a rental neighborhood. So they're hoping that could be turned into some residential parking permitted situation, particularly at night. And again, the secondary concern or issue about these is that along this stretch, which you can see here is kind of bumper to bumper all the way down the neighborhood, is that these 3 signs occur all within about 150 feet of each other. So as a personal point, I'm very curious about how that no parking sign ended up in front of one house, and also some way that we can perhaps streamline these 2 permit parking situations that are already in place.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Chair, I do have a question. If we could go back, I think it's 2 slides. You mentioned that the desire, I guess it's just one, so forward one, yeah, thank you. I think you were specifically talking about the north side of the road, mentioning moving that to a residential parking permit program. But then noted that there's only one
Right, one home.
on that. So who, in your idea, like who would be permitted to park there?
Right, so according, and again, I understand personally that there are some kind of issues with this, but most of these complaints have come from the tenants of that one home on the north side, and also the tenants of the Nantucket condo submitted a petition with almost everybody in that issue, in that condo complex. So the condo owners would hope that they would be able to receive residential parking passes to park on that stretch.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. Any comment from the public about this item? All right, seeing none, I am bring it back for any discussion from the council. We're looking for a motion to direct that a study of the proposed amendment be undertaken by the city parking coordinator. Mr. Sewell,
So moved.
any a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion? Call for a vote on the motion.
I do have.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
If that's all right. I note that the purpose of this public meeting is to consider the level of public interest in the proposed amendment. I appreciated the comments from the neighborhood chair. What's your impression as far as the level of public interest in this proposal?
As I've said, I've received a significant number of complaints from the tenants of the home on the north side, and also a petition with about 20 signatures on it, all from the residents of the Nantucket condos, which is basically everybody that lives there. We haven't discussed it as a neighborhood on the whole, but amongst those people, we've had almost unanimous interest.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
If I might ask you a question, just to clarify, so what really is going on here is the owners of the condos want more parking because they have inadequate parking at their condo.
The residents of the condos. So I looked into the parking situation at the Nantucket condos in particular, and from what I can surmise, which is probably subject to some more confirmation, there are 6 or 7 condos in there and about 20 parking spots, but the management corporation only allots 1 parking spot per condo. I'm told that that's because of city regulations on the number of visitor parking slots that are required. But the current situation, again, as far as I understand, is that there is currently 1 parking spot allotted per condo.
So the problem isn't sporadic, like when the church to the south is having a major event, that's not so much the problem as these folks need more parking, they feel, because it's inadequate within their complex.
I would agree with that assessment.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you very much. So there's been a second, and is there any more discussion? If not, I will call for a vote on the motion. All in favor? Okay, the voting is unanimous. Thank you very much. All right, we'll now turn to item number 3 on the agenda, an implied motion on an ordinance amending the general plan designation of approximately 151 acres, generally located between 300 East and 1000 East and between 4800 North and 6000 North from agricultural to residential, and this is in the North Timpview neighborhood, and our presenter will be Mr. Brian Maxfield, Provo City Planner.
Thank you. What staff would like to do is present some background information so that there's a common understanding as we begin this item. The request is by Mr. Jones. It involves property on the northeast area of the city. This shows the general outline boundaries for that. And then the lighter green area shows the current agricultural designation on our general plan. By state code, the city is allowed to extend their general plan designations beyond city limits. In this case, if we can go to the next slide, if I can do that. There we go. This shows better the city limits, which is this marked line here that goes around, and then outlined in orange there are the lands involved. You can see that some of those lands are inside the city boundaries, some are currently outside. I think Mr. Sewell asked what those numbers were. The overall acreage is 151 acres with 94 and a half being outside the city and 56 and a half approximately being inside the city boundaries. So the majority of that is outside the city at this time. The current zoning on the property in the county is TR5, which is transitional residential 5 acres. However, through the development allowances within the county ordinance, a developer could do a plan development that allows up to 3 units per acre when they meet the requirements of that zone. The requested change Mr. Jones has is a general plan amendment would principally facilitate the future application for an annexation and rezoning of the property, as well as a approval of a development plan for the site. We want to emphasize that tonight's item is really just the general plan amendment. Those other items are not being brought before you. Mr. Jones did apply originally for the annexation and the rezonings and the development plan to go forward. However, staff felt that the general plan was important to have the council confirm what's basically been the policy for 40 years, that this is in the annexation policy boundary as well as a agricultural designation. In saying that, it's important to note the differences in the general plan in the written text versus the land use map. The land use map is based on the written text, but both of those documents talk about hillside protection, basically the sensitivity of those hillside areas. And this area is also cross-hatched on the map, but the text also refers to that. The current proposal does not change that. There's no application to change that designation. The land would still stay under that environmental sensitive overlay, and any development would be subject to that. The lands involved through this area have been privately owned. In fact, if you go on the right side or the eastern edge of the boundary and extends up to the Smith property, everything east of that is Forest Service, or at least federal lands. And so that kind of is the boundary between the privately owned lands and then the federal area. The progression of this in your considerations would be that with the general plan amendment, it would obviously look to then facilitate the applications for an annexation as well as the development and the rezoning of the property. If it were denied, the applicant could still continue as it is a policy, but of course then we wouldn't have maybe have to rectify the general plan with the annexation. But at this time, what we're again looking for is that we consider the validity of that policy and going forward. The way the agricultural zone is written is to be protected as agricultural until such time as it's deemed necessary and desirable to change the use to a residential use, or it also says industrial and commercial. We don't think that's a consideration here. But then it becomes that issue of timing, whether it's necessary and desirable to go forward at this time. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Maxfield? And is Mr. Jones going to make a presentation? Is that correct? Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay, I am technologically handicapped, so I brought my son along with me to handle that stuff. Go ahead and get to the maps. I'm going to talk about the history of the property a little bit and what the property is currently zoned. I was approached over last week by several citizens who have been fed a lot of misinformation about it, and I'd just like to clarify. First of all, our site is 168.5 acres, not 151. There's 151 inside the county, if you include the Scott and Jenny Smith piece, which we're not proposing for any sort of development, and we have no agreement with them. I think that's where the confusion is. So here's an overlay of the area. And if you'll notice to the east, it's government land. It's owned by the United States of America. That's shown in the Provo 50-year plan as property that they want to develop. So, but right now it's owned by the United States government. We've approached them and talked to them a little bit about it, and their attitude is that they'd be happy to trade. You know, there's some areas where they want land and some areas where they don't want it as bad, and they're happy to trade. So there could be development to the east if Provo City desired. Andy, can you point to the piece on the north Provo City piece? Okay, that piece of property is owned by Provo City and is not part of our proposal. Okay, I think there's a lot of confusion there. When we first started working on the property, we bought a contract signed by Mayor Curtis a long time ago for a sale of the property to us. It needed to be ratified by the city council. We surmised that that wasn't something that the city wanted to do, and we just moved on from it. Okay, so here's the, Andy, yeah, there you go. Okay, that piece, go up a little bit, Andy. That piece there is the part that's in Provo City. It's been there for a while. We own it. It's privately owned land, but it's within the jurisdiction of Provo City. Okay, almost all the rest of the property is in Utah County. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, and you see the big orange blob there? That's the Utah County property, and it's zoned TR5. And as Mr. Maxfield indicated, we're allowed to have 3 units per acre. There are 3 criteria to get to that level, and we meet all 3 criteria. There's a couple of differences between what the county would want and what Provo City would want, I think. So in the county zoning, 20% of our building has to be moderate income housing. Not low income, but moderate income. And as we develop in Utah County, we'll need to do that. That means a higher density. So the proposal that we made to Provo as an annexed piece of ground was without that requirement. So we'd have to take the density up to get closer to the 3 units an acre to accommodate that deal. So our property goes to the end of the orange. And as you can see, the green area has been designated as sensitive lands. Okay, that's the division. None of our property is in that area. That's directly from the Utah County zoning map. And even in your general plan, it indicates that the sensitive land starts east to the beginning of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail, which is just right there on the corner of that green. Right down, Andy, down. No, this way. Up, there you go. It's right there. Starts right there. Okay, next slide, please. So here's your developmentally sensitive lands ordinance. I'm not going to try and read it word for word, but basically what it says is on developmentally sensitive lands, you can still develop it. You just have to test it to make sure that it qualifies. The sensitive lands issue is mostly about earthquakes. So we feel like we can develop it fairly easily under those rules that are currently in Provo City's general plan. Okay, next slide, Andy. Okay, this was a big question for people, so we took a second to do a diagram for you. So the Terra project, what we want to develop, is all to the inside of that blue line. I think that's illustrated pretty good. And then just past that blue line are the critical environmental lands, kind of scribbled in green. And somebody asked us, because everybody knows where Foothill Drive is, to take the Foothill Drive and run it all the way across to where our property is. So you can see that we're well to the west of where Foothill Drive is, which I think is a confusion in a lot of people's minds. Next slide, Andy. Okay, so the blue area on this drawing is all the property that we own that's in Utah County. Okay, so the properties that are in Provo, here on the top right, Andy, okay, is owned by the Grows, and we have a contract with them to develop that as part of our development. It's in Provo City, and it's zoned A15. Same as the piece that we own down there. Okay? Now, the other green one right here in the middle is not part of our project, but it's zoned R120, which is half-acre lots, which is basically what we basically have proposed to Provo City, that density. It's 1.54 units an acre. So even in Provo City, that area is already zoned for basically what we're asking for. We want to bulk ours a little closer together and provide much more green space, but generally the density is the same. Okay, this property that looks pink, I don't know how we did that, that was an orange pen, is also in the county, is not part of our development, but as we develop in the county, I don't know why they wouldn't join in with us and develop their land to 3 units an acre. They certainly could, easily. And now would be the time, I would guess. So all of this stuff was already in place. We came to Provo City, and we respectfully asked to be annexed to Provo City because it makes the most sense. I think Provo City needs the access through our property to meet its 50-year plan. And we know that they need the infrastructure, which we're offering at no price, no cost to the city or its citizens. So I was asked to keep the presentation to 10 minutes. I'll end it there. We spent $30,000 on the rest of the presentation. You got all the hand-done stuff. If you want to see any of it, we'll make it available to you. But we've flown the site with drones and taken shots from North Canyon Road. We went over that all with the Planning Commission, where they gave us a 6-2 recommendation. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions for Mr. Jones? Thank you.
I do,
Go ahead.
actually. Mr. Jones, I did watch the Planning Commission meeting, so I've seen the drone footage and all that.
Cool.
Thank you for providing those resources.
Sure.
And for the presentation you gave. You mentioned, I know this isn't directly related to our the question we have in front of us today, but you mentioned the 3 criteria to develop the county property.
Uh-huh.
Did I miss those 3? You mentioned the one, you have to develop a certain percentage and have it be moderate income housing. Did I miss the other 2?
I didn't say them.
Okay. Do you know what they are?
I have them with me. I read them in the Planning Commission meeting.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, one of them is green space.
Okay.
So 30% of the site needs to be in green space, and we meet that requirement very easily. And the moderate housing, the moderate income housing.
I'll look it up.
The third is escaping. I have it with me. I'd be happy to.
Sure. I'll look it up while we're listening to public comment.
But
too.
we meet all 3 criteria easily.
Okay.
And we've met with the and we've met with Utah County and confirmed that.
Okay. Thank you.
Brian, do you have information on that?
I just felt it's necessary to make one clarification so we're all on the same page as we go along. The reason the numbers differ from the acreages is because we did not count the land that's currently designated as residential on the general plan. The request is only to change the land that's currently designated agricultural to residential. So that's why there's a difference in the numbers. I didn't.
So the 150 acres that are currently designated as agriculture, 94.5 of those are in county land.
Correct.
Okay.
And the remainder of the 168 acres are currently designated residential in the city or on the general plan. And so that's why our number's 151 and his was 168, if that makes sense.
And do you happen to know what the third criterion for? Okay. All right.
Don't, sorry. If that helps. Just
okay.
start.
Thank you.
And I do have one more question when Mr. Jones comes back.
Okay.
Go ahead with the other question while I'm looking.
So this term necessary and desirable has been brought up, that in order to, I don't want to say justify changing a designation from agricultural to residential, it needs to be considered necessary and desirable. I assume when you were planning this development, you were looking at the market, and you came to a conclusion that you can make money off this development. So from your perspective, it would be desirable at least. But I'm curious what your market research showed. Why you felt like this is a viable development, that there's a need or a desire for people to live up there. Basically, just understand your perspective on that, necessary or desirable aspect of this development.
That's a fantastic question. So, 2 weeks ago I had 21 reservations and now I have 24. So obviously there's a demand, but the marketplace without the direct reaction to my property is that Provo's severely lacking in new housing in the upper income levels. Severely lacking. So people who want to live in Provo move to Alpine and Highland and other areas where they provide this kind of housing. A lot of what you have to deal with in Provo is old stuff or west side of the freeway by the Utah Lake, which is a more dense, more young person kind of housing. So we feel like there's an overwhelming need for this, and we think it would benefit the city greatly to have that product available so that some of your upper income earners could stay in Provo instead of moving to Highland and Alpine. I mean, it's, I was looking in an advertisement today for a project in Alpine that actually said that. If you want to be close to Provo and work in Provo, we've got the product that you're looking for, So we'd love to be able to say, hey, Provo's got the product that you're looking for, and benefit the city in that way, keep some of the tax base here, which I know that the city's in need of. So the third requirement is that the open space is open to the use of the general public. And as everybody knows, we've taken a section on the eastern portion right there and provided a park with a little movable structure and a pond and a picnic area that works in conjunction with the Bonneville shoreline. It's not part of the Bonneville shoreline, but it would be easily accessible for people who are up hiking around. And then we'd maintain that in our HOA. That's the third. So 30% public accessibility to green space, and 10% of the dwelling units up to 20% to be moderate income.
I don't want to get too off track here, but I feel like the potential development of Utah County and the potential development of the Provo properties, to some extent, maybe symbiotic, or they're closely related, if nothing else. I know in a previous meeting you had mentioned that if Provo City denies this request, that your plan is to develop the Utah County property regardless, and that you had mentioned that it might have to be some sort of private gated community or something like that. Would then, though, the open green space and public access still apply even if you were to develop that?
Good question. So my infrastructure costs would go up if I did it without a municipality.
Right.
So, yeah, I need to take full advantage of the 3 units per acre density. But I'm zoned for that.
I guess my question was, if you were to do that, would the green space requirements still be in play?
Getting to that.
Oh, sorry. Go
Because
ahead.
I have to go to the higher density, there would certainly be less space that I'd have available. And we might need to actually develop that eastern bench because we can. It's very flat up there. I just don't know the answers to those things yet.
Okay.
And I'd just like to correct the thing you said just a little bit with respect.
Sure.
So we've determined that we're going to develop in Utah County. It's done. But we'd love, in the end, to annex to Provo City and be part of Provo City. So we could enter into a utilities agreement. Otherwise, we'd have to do something else. We could design the project so Provo had the accessibility that they wanted if we were working together. All those things. But the difference between developing in Provo City and developing in Utah County is that we're already approved in Utah County. We don't need to go to any hearings. It's a done deal. So we can start immediately as soon as the snow clears. And we'd like to do that. But on the other hand, it makes a lot of sense for us to be working with Provo City. And we'd be happy to do that if Provo City would extend a welcome to us and start negotiations on how that might work. I'm very easy to get a hold of. Anybody can call me.
Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
okay.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned, the decisions are separate, obviously, what you do with Utah County.
Right.
Just wanted to, I guess, make sure, also let the public be informed as well. So I asked a few questions to kind of clarify that. So thank you for taking the time.
Okay.
Ellsworth.
Yeah, I'm curious now, if you intend to develop in Utah County prior to annexation, what value does this application have for you?
Well, I think that I know that we started this process with Provo City a year ago. And out of respect for all the work that was put in by staff and several of the meetings that we've had privately, we'd like to give it a chance to meet with fruition. And we would be happy to moderate what we're doing. And I know that the Utah County would adapt its zoning a little bit if they knew that we were eventually going to wind up annexed to Provo City. And Provo City is our cheapest option, and it makes the most sense. But we have 4 other options, none of them municipalities. We have spoken with Orem, but that's not a go. We're okay with that. We're pretty easy. But I think that the property should be part of Provo, and that's the reason that I'm going forward with it.
Okay. I have a couple more questions.
Okay.
You mentioned a 50-year plan, Provo's 50-year plan. What are you referencing there?
We viewed a plan in one of the meetings with the engineering staff that showed the property to the east being developed, and it was mentioned that Provo City might intend to move a golf course there one day. I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't look into it too deeply. It was just a flash by, and they told me it was the 50-year plan.
The 50-year plan.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what that
I don't
is
know.
either.
Me neither.
So, another question for you.
Okay.
You mentioned a certain road the city wanted extended or continued. Can you give me a little more context? Which road is that, and where did you learn that the city wanted it?
Again, this was in an engineering meeting, and the actual person who mentioned that was Dave Decker. He wanted access in every direction.
Okay.
So if you look at the plan that we've submitted, it has access points, which got my my future neighbors, or my current neighbors, the Scott and Jenny Smith, a little peeved at me because one of them was pointing through their property. So I'm not advocating that anybody has to give up any of their property for these access points, but Dave Decker instructed me to put them in my plan in
Okay.
every direction, and that's what we did.
Gotcha. And those just might be access points for fire access.
I think it's for future roads to the east.
Okay.
It was made clear that that was the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'm also curious about the water tanks on the, what is that? The west side, so the top of this map.
Mhm.
There's potential water tank, 1, 2, 3. No, I'm sorry. There's one potential water tank that's outside of your property. Is that something that you have an easement for or access to, or?
We have an easement across Scott and Jenny's property for one of our roads. And then there's a kind of vague reference to a water tank, but it's very small. We've spoken with Scott and Jenny a few times about water tanks on their property. And sometimes they're feeling good about it, and sometimes they're not. It's usually has something to do with me, and I accept that. They're good people. I think, though, that the best solution is the one right there. That's at 5,500 feet. And then we'd go to the Sherwood Hills tank and expand it and make a looping system to meet the city's long-range plan. Again, the city has a long-range water tank plan, and that's their biggest issue on it. And as a matter of fact, when we started this process, we were told if we provided the $2 million of water tank capacity, we were in. But now we can't get anybody to even tell us where you want it. So yeah, that's a little bit of an issue.
Okay, these water tanks.
But we're happy to give you 2 million gallons of water storage.
Thanks.
Yeah.
These water tanks are not all required. You just need one water tank?
So in the city's long-range water plan, they need more capacity at the elevation of 5,595 feet. The Sherwood Hills tank is at that level. The only other site on the property that's at that level is to the far left corner on Scott and Jenny's property. But the city has indicated that they need 1 million gallons of capacity at that level. And Scott and Jenny had only, now I'm speaking for them and I don't mean to. I'm just regurgitating what we talked about. So I'm not making a decision for Scott and Jenny. I just want to make that clear. And we have no arrangement. So they have always assumed that that would be a 500,000 gallon tank, and anything bigger, I think, really bothers them. It makes more sense to go to the Sherwood Hills tank because it's kind of old and needs some repair anyway. So if we just expanded that to 1 million gallons and looped it, it works just as good and doesn't cost us a penny more.
Okay, so your project is not dependent on a water tank outside of your boundary?
Not even kinda, no.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Mr. Fillmore.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Jones, I need clarification on something.
Sure.
You indicated just a few minutes ago that you don't need any further approvals from the county. You're ready to go this spring.
Well, we have to submit a site plan that meets the requirements, but we're fully entitled in zoning. We don't have to hold any public hearings or get anybody's approval. We're fully approved.
I understand about the zoning.
Yeah.
But there are other things.
Well, it's just a site plan. That's just dotting the i's and crossing the t's.
Isn't there one more critical element? In speaking a few weeks ago, one of your representatives called me to tell me what was going on at the county level, that you'd met with some, I guess, administrative people at the county, and indicated that they were favorably disposed to help you, given the zoning the way it is, but that you would, before anything could be approved, you'd be required to get a utility services agreement with either Provo City or Orem City.
That would be incorrect.
Okay? You don't need that.
I do not.
How are you going to access utilities?
I think when he called you, that's what he thought was going to happen. Well, I'd prefer to keep that private now because
Please, no outbursts. Thank you.
I prefer to keep that private because I know that we were talking to Orem City and Provo City contacted them and made it clear that they didn't want that issue they didn't want them to be doing business with us. And so they broke off conversations. So we'll just keep that private for now. We have 3 choices that we can make that don't include any municipality.
Okay. Don't you think it would be helpful to our deliberations if you told us what those 3 options were?
That's great, but I'm going to pass on that.
Okay.
With respect.
But as of today, you haven't heard anything from Orem City about their interest or disinterest?
I told you that Orem City is off the table.
Oh, okay, that they've declined.
They declined.
Okay.
Based on conversations that they had with the city manager here in Provo. That's why I'll keep it private for now.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Mr. Jones? Thank you, Mr. Jones. Let's see, we have a neighborhood chair, Bonnie Morrow. Give you 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Morrow. I'm the North Timpview Neighborhood Chair. I will try and keep it in 5 minutes. I've spent many hours meeting on this subject, representing as the neighborhood chair and representing the city. And trying to come to a consensus with the public and with the county and with the city over this very convoluted and very contentious topic, okay? I'd like to start by saying that historically, I have been the chair that has helped to facilitate bringing in properties all along this Canyon Road in between these properties into the city in this very exact process. And they have been approved and brought in. And I was reminded of that and that it was on my honor that I speak to that. And that segues into the next thing. Where does the neighborhood stand on this? We've had many meetings for over a year on this topic. And the reason that things are shifting back and forth is because the developer has not ever actually submitted a plan. He's floated proposals for how these developments would look like and how they would be clustered or spread or high density or low density, and people have commented on them. And then we've had new proposals. Prior to me taking over this project, Dave Rosen, who can't be, Dave Rosen, who can't be with us here tonight, he had a completely different proposal. And then, as you know, this property was annexed, or not annexed, but brought into the North Timpview neighborhood where I took over. And so it has a long history of different proposals as the developer has tried to figure out a plan that everybody would like. And people haven't seen all of the different morphs of these plans. So that's why my neighborhood is extremely split. We have people that are against it because they want the orchards to stay. They want to be able to see horses. They want open, vacant land. And they don't want anything else to be there because that is how they purchased their homes in Provo and saw this scenery, and that's why they were attracted to where they wanted to be. And we have people that are, and those people are against this being approved. We have people that are for this being approved because they're worried about personal property rights. They're worried that these lands are privately owned. They're not owned by the BLM, the federal government. They're privately owned and they've been in their families for over 100 years. And as they've come to me and asked to be annexed into the city, then they've become developed. And so these are their families, as you will, how their investment that their families have made for their families. And so there's great concern on that side of the table. And I sit in the middle of this, as do you. And my job as neighborhood chair is to present to you what transpired in these meetings and leave my emotions out of it, which I hope that I am doing a good job of. Some questions have been raised, and I don't have the answers for them. I present them to council. The first one is, and I think you guys have been discussing it, is it possible to get enough infrastructure to develop in the county? If so, how many homes? Once all the requirements by the county are met? That's a big question. Number two, if development in the county were to happen, will the school tax dollars go to Alpine and the children in this development go to Provo City Schools? We already have this happening, as I was told by staff, in other parts of Provo City, where we have developments that have been developed in the county, and those tax dollars are going to Alpine School District, and those children attend Provo City. So that's a question that needs to be addressed. We kind of touched over here, Mr. Hoban brought up, if developed in the county, will we be allowed to have public access for hiking and trails? And if it's developed in the city, will it be gated or time, or, excuse me, sorry, the buzzer went off and I lost my mind. Okay. If development in the city, will we be allowed hiking through the development? You know, and those are things that whichever way they go, we would actually like them incorporated in writing. Okay. The last thing, may I proceed?
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. The last thing is that we've dealt with, and Scott and Jenny are here, is during Mayor Curtis's time on Canyon Road, we had a big giant fire that went all the way down these lands. And I stood there in the middle of the night with Mayor Curtis and the fire department and the police department, and Scott came up on his four-wheeler and had the maps, and the fire department was asking, which lands are in the county, which lands are in the city? And I stood there, well, this land has just come into the city, we just had this meeting, this one's out, this one's in, as the fire was burning across, and I was like, Provo City just needs to put the fire out because the fire is moving, and send a bill to the county, because the county fire department was not there.
Thank you.
So
We need to have you wrap up. Thanks.
Great.
Okay.
Okay, so we're split.
Okay, thank you very much. It was an excellent report. Okay, we will now open it up for public comment. I want to set a few expectations here. I already mentioned we would really strongly ask you not to engage in any outbursts or applause, no personal attacks. Let's keep it civil. We've been recently trying to figure out how to keep our city council meetings from going until very late hours in the night because we don't always think as clearly as we do at 7 p.m. as we do at 9 or 10 p.m. And so we had recently decided that at 9 p.m. we would sort of pause and decide, no matter what meeting it was independent of this one, the 9 p.m. would be kind of our outer limit. We would stop at that point and decide whether we were going to allow for a little bit more time or continue. So I say that by way of introduction, that I'm going to ask, this obviously is your time and we really want to hear from anybody who wishes to speak. However, I would just simply ask a couple of things. One is I'm going to be strict about the 2 minutes. And two, you know what the item is about, and hopefully we can get comments that are on the item that we're deliberating and try to keep it away from issues pertaining to this that are extraneous to our decision tonight. And the third thing is that we have received, it's probably safe to say, hundreds of emails, and we read them. And if you've already sent us a long email, at least I can speak for myself, I've already read it unless you sent it in the last 3 hours, which means I'll read it tomorrow. But I'll just ask to be judicious about whether or not you feel like it's necessary to say what you've already sent us, or if someone else stands and says what you wanted to say, you can make the decision as to whether or not it's necessary to stand and say the same thing. But just keep in mind that redundancy doesn't necessarily help, although we like I say, I'm trying to be sensitive about the fact that you've come here to express your views, and we want to hear them, and we respect that very much. This is what this whole democratic process is about. So we're certainly happy that you're here and grateful to have this opportunity with you, but we just want to try to, it's my job to try to manage the time. It's not fun, so just please help me out. Thank you. All right, so we'll start, and I'll just ask that the clock start with each speaker. Thank you. And please state your name and residence.
My name is Craig Christensen. I'm a resident of Provo. You know, in difficult situations, my mom would always point a finger at me and say, Craig, if this was easy, they wouldn't need you. And I realize this isn't easy, and I have a very strong opinion about those lands and also the ones to the east. My mom was born here in Provo. She graduated from Provo High School in '47. Grandpa ran a shoe store just a couple blocks down here on Center Street. He owned horses. He rode up in the hills, and they had a wonderful experience in the foothills. My children have also enjoyed those foothills, hiking and climbing and getting a chance to enjoy some of Provo's most unique aspect, which is its foothills. My hope is that my grandchildren's grandchildren don't just read about it, that they also have the same opportunity. So for generations past, the healthy environment of Provo, the safety of its neighborhoods, and care that has been given to the welfare of Provo citizens has been a priority. I'm asking you to keep that a priority. The Foothill Preservation Ordinance and the neighborhood plan need to be finalized before an exception like this should be considered. I believe it's out of sequence. My feeling is that to ensure the preservation of the trails, the open spaces, and also for the healthy environment, we need to make sure we get the sequencing right. It would be imprudent. It would be irreversible to allow one person's interest to go ahead of countless generations that will follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christensen.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Kay Nelson. I live in the North Timpview neighborhood of Provo. The issue before you is to consider an amendment to the general plan changing the designation of this acreage in the northeast area from agricultural to residential. I met recently with Mr. Jones along with Craig Christensen and another man, and Mr. Jones is a man with a goal. The city of Provo and its citizens also have a goal to preserve the remaining foothills of Provo for generations to come. Some have pointed out other foothill areas in Provo have been developed, so why not develop the last of the foothills in the northeast area? That's exactly why not, because they are the last. More foothills extend south along Provo and north into Provo Canyon. These are irreplaceable treasures. Changing that area from agricultural to residential sends the message that it's okay to give up the beautiful views that people love, and it's okay to pave over the meadows and the bluffs and the wildlife habitat and trails that right now anyone can enjoy. That's not the message we should be sending. The Foothills Preservation Committee, which several of you serve on, is writing an ordinance to preserve the foothills of Provo. Please allow time to research and create that ordinance. And Mr. Pepperoni told us the city will now create a neighborhood plan for that area. They too should have adequate time to listen to the residents about what their goals are. Any development that impacts the city or county should not be done without research, including surveys of those impacted. The city must not be hasty in making decisions that will negatively impact Provo. Some think development in the foothills is inevitable. It's not inevitable. People come from all over, and they want Provo's foothills to remain untouched by development. People come to recreate in these foothills and canyons. These are great tourist destinations that can bring in tax revenue. People who will live in places like Millrace and other big downtown developments will need places to recreate. These foothills are a gift for all residents. I don't think that the goal of many should be dismissed in favor of the goal of one. Thank you.
Sharon Mehmet, and Kay mentioned the Foothills Protection Committee that was talked about in your work session on October 29th, and it was floated that it could take 6 months. I don't know if that's true, but that means we're almost halfway there. So you're almost done with that, I hope. I hope that you'll wait to change the zoning until that process can be finished. In part because I say this as a young homeowner, knew nothing about zoning and general plans and all that. When we chose our home, we drove all of Provo. That's where my husband's job was, so that's what we did. We probably would have gone to Springville if we hadn't found what we did. But we drove Provo, and we chose where we live because of the open space. I had a neighbor say to me recently that the reason to move to Edgemont and the northeast area is gone because these spaces are being gobbled up by infill and projects that are built that way. I apologize for getting emotional, but I feel strongly about this. Because learning in that process, as I have, that there is a general plan, that there are zoning things, so that as developers come, because that is their job, they do look at these things before they purchase. They know what the zone is, what the general plan is. And so we have in our general plan, and I hope Mr. Maxfield will come up and readdress this. In your report, it says this area is in sensitive lands. The part of the code I will read says that this is as a flag to put prospective purchasers and land developers that there may be physical limitations or hazards. Your agricultural thing says agricultural pursuits can be encouraged and supported within the municipality and is intended to protect agricultural uses from encroachment of other development until such time as residential, commercial become necessary and desirable. And I would ask you, who gets to make that decision about residential and desirable?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members and staff. I was here for a City Council meeting back in December on this very same issue, and it was a full house that night, and it looks like it's another kind of a packed house. So I'm just wondering, I'm just kind of curious, of all the residents that are here today, who is in attendance to preserve the foothills? Would you please stand or raise your hand? Okay, I just wanted to see. The reason that we have another full house tonight is simple. The residents of Provo feel very strongly that the remaining open foothills are a treasure that we don't want to lose. They are a critical part of our history and as well as our present lives and should remain unmarred for future generations. As you know, the benefits of green space and preservation of lands to people are numerous and well documented and include physical, mental, social, and community health. That's why I believe that amending the land use designation in this area from agricultural to residential is not in the best long-term interest of Provo and its residents. Doing so would start a domino effect that would lead to further change and open the door to ultimately more development in these and adjacent areas. Such an action would be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to walk back in the future. I understand that the Foothills Preservation Committee is working on an ordinance that would define how our foothills are protected. I also understand that a neighborhood plan is going to be created for the northeast area of Provo. I ask that adequate time be given to these two critical efforts and that the voices of Provo residents be allowed to shape these documents. At the very least, it is premature to allow any changes to these areas, to the areas in question before the Foothill Protection Ordinance and the Northeast Area Neighborhood Plan are completed. This is a pivotal moment in Provo's history, and the consequences of the decisions we are making in this brief moment of time will resonate far beyond now and will impact, for better or worse, generations to come. What's needed now is a far-sighted perspective, not a short-sighted one. Thank you.
Mr. Franks, could you state your name for the record?
Sorry, Todd Franks.
Thanks.
Dear Council and Mayor Kafusi, my name is Susan Christensen and I live in the Sherwood Hills neighborhood. I am concerned about this development before you because of Mile High Drive. I am concerned about the 2 homes that slid off the foothills in my own neighborhood, which is lower than Mile High in the past since we moved here in 1996. I also want to reference an article from the Salt Lake Tribune written by Todd Hollingshead, and I actually sent it to all of you this afternoon. In the past 18 months, movement in the Sherwood Hills landslide has rendered 3 homes along a dip of the road uninhabitable, according to Francis Ashland, a geologist with the Utah Geological Survey. The Sherwood Hills landslide never stops. It's continuously moving, Ashland said. Even in a dry year, there's an average of 7 utility disconnects up in the area near Mile High Drive. Slight movement is nothing new. Geologists say that there has been motion for 25 years in the area, but the more devastating effects to homes have been on the increase since the wet winter of 2005. The diagnosis, expansive clays in the foundation, but the biggest problem in the area, he says, is water. The state geologist said the ground's water buildup is higher than it has ever been. Making matters worse, the hillside sits on a layer of shale that acts as a slippery slope. The more waterlogged the ground gets, the more it slides, at least an inch a year, sometimes more. Police tape now surrounds portions of this certain man's empty house. The house next door is abandoned too. Mile High Drive itself, the road, is cut up as well, the result of a recent repair job on the storm drain and sewer lines underneath that were damaged by movement. Provo City Engineer Nick Jones said that the city has twice rebuilt portions of the road. People will sacrifice anything for a lot with a view, Jones said. People are, and this is Nick Jones, the city engineer, not Bob Jones. People are very insistent in this area. Jones said that there has been no new building in the immediate area since 1999 when the city finished a $300,000 study to define the slide location.
Thank you.
My name is Alex Groh. I'm a resident of North Canyon Road. I'm a 3rd-generation property owner in the land adjoining the proposed Terra development and an owner of East Lawn Memorial Hills, the cemetery just to the south of the project, and access point to the Bonneville Shoreline Trail. I'm here to encourage your support for the development of this project. My family is in the process of potentially selling some of our land to the Terra Group for their development. In this process, we've become very familiar with Bob Jones and others involved in this proposed development. They're good people with a bold vision for a luxury housing development. And while I stand to gain personally from the sale of our property as a resident of this area my entire adult life, my reasons for support are the following. 1, infrastructure. As has been discussed, further development of North Provo has challenges with access to sufficient water pressure. Mr. Jones will foot that bill, seeking repayment from the residents of his development for the necessary water storage to service not only his project, but all future developable areas in North Provo. This is a great benefit to the municipal taxpayers. 2, misinformation. Being familiar with the actual plans of the Terra project, but also a resident of the area and community activation in regards to for those who are against the development. There has been a lot of misinformation. People claiming they spend time on this ground are confused as to which ground is actually being developed. They're also admitting to trespassing. The existing trail system is to the east of what is being proposed as a development. The proposed project would go almost entirely in place of a burned down orchard. Not to mention the proposed consolidation of power lines that currently spread across the whole project and create an eyesore. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jane Wilson. I live in Northeast Timpview. My family moved here in 1991. I was raised many places in the world, educated on the East Coast, from the DC area, my husband also from the DC area, and taught at BYU for a number of years. I saw what happened in Northern Virginia in the 70s and 80s, and I'm here to give you a quick view of what you can see should you choose to develop these pristine lands that lay fallow now, that are seismically active, as we know. Water is one of our most precious resources in the West. I still have no idea from this developer where the water is coming from, who will not get water because of this development. And I think that Northeast Provo is pretty good the way it is. I don't think we need luxury housing any more than we didn't need it in Northern Virginia when they carved up every piece of green land outside or inside of the Beltway, which would be similar to 215 here. If you had no green land inside of your Beltway here, you'd be screaming for green land. I know that the foothills are not green, but we also right now in Northeast Provo have a problem with our wildlife population. We have already gone into their population areas and where they live and breed, and I know that the city of Provo is culling them. I live next to one of the only orchards standing in Northeast Provo. I would like to see green space remain. I don't think we need a luxury development anywhere in Provo right now. I think we need to concentrate on a future that preserves our water, preserves our land, preserves our air for future generations. We have enough here. We don't need any more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Candace Jacobson. I live just off Canyon Road in Northeast Provo, and I have two issues I hope the Commission will consider before making this zoning change. The first one has been addressed. It is the geological stability of the area, which I think has been handled really well. I think you should know that there actually was a geotech survey that was commissioned on this parcel of land, this area of land, when it was called Country 8 Canyon Oaks, and it was done by the Rollins Brown Gunnell engineering firm of Provo. According to that survey, there are parts of this hillside that are not suited for anything but agricultural because of their geological instability. This survey would be available to Provo City if they were requested and were interested in reading that. The second area of concern is Canyon Road. The residents of our neighborhoods all use Canyon Road every day, and we understand the limitations. This is a Provo City road, but the Utah Department of Transportation has an interest in the impact of greatly increased traffic on this road because it intersects with US 189. There have been fatalities at this intersection, so UDOT has done some planning, trying to come up with alternative solutions for the way this road is arranged. There are solutions they have come up with, but they're very costly. They are very interested. Their Planning and Studies Department would like to work with Provo City in the Roads Department to consider the impact of greatly increased traffic at the bottom of North Canyon Road as part of its new policy to work proactively with communities to avoid the gridlock that has become so much a part of life on the Wasatch Front. I'd like to encourage at this time the Commission to table the zoning change until both the geological impact and the safety of Canyon Road are investigated completely and to your satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Scott G. Smith, lifelong resident of Northeast Provo. My wife and our children are fifth and sixth generation Smiths that have farmed this property. We have 51 acres. And we raise on 3 different locations 50 plus tons of fruit. 50 would be a worst case scenario. It's our family business, that's what we do. Near the end of last week's planning meeting, Commissioner Jensen asked if there's truly no agricultural use happening on the Terra property, are there any potential negative impacts for those agricultural areas that are neighboring this area because they would have residential areas next to it. Since Terra Development property shares 4,200 feet of border with our property and farming operation, I think that's a very good question. That would require far more than 2 minutes to address. It's clear that this development would create a new urban agriculture interface that will likely introduce conflicts and challenges to our neighborhood and our property and livelihood. What is needful and desirable to one party can be devastating to another, as we expressed in our letter. And this was brought up with the road to our property, the Forest Service. Brother, Mr. Decker has Bob Jones is referring to, talked about a road to the Forest Service through our property. And this was brought up in the December 4th Planning Commission meeting as an access to the east to the U.S. Forest Service across our family property, even though we have repeatedly stated we're not willing to provide that access to this developer. Our APA status prevents anyone from forcing that kind of an access. It would take more than 2 minutes to address it adequately, so I'll just say that we've made it clear to Provo City, and this is going back 7 years or more, that we would be glad to work with them on a spot for a water tank if desired. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jenny Smith, a longtime resident of Northeast Provo and Scott's wife. In 2003, the Provo City General Plan was revisited and updated. As part of this process, Scott and I were invited to represent our neighbors in a work-study conversation with the council regarding the city's proposal to designate most of the property in our neighborhood as environmentally sensitive. Our presentation made the argument for why a blanket designation for land with mixed characteristics and uses would do a disservice to the land property owners in the city. We shared information and photos about the orchards, pastures, animal husbandry, and other agricultural uses. We shared photos of the steep slopes and the significant amount of property that had a 5 to 10% grade. We shared the productive soils, known locations of Manning Canyon shale, and the geotech that showed stable ground as well as red flags. Not fully understanding how the general plan designation worked, we requested that our neighborhood remain with an agriculture designation while allowing for areas of environmentally sensitive or residential as on an individual basis is appropriate. The council responded by assigning our neighborhood with an agriculture designation as well as the developmentally sensitive designation. The letter and spirit of the general plan direct that instead of on this developmentally sensitive kind of land, remain in the instead of it remaining in an agriculture designation until development is needful and desirable, that land remain in the agriculture designation unless the studies of potential geologic hazards, constraints, etc., are completed and considered by qualified engineers to determine the appropriateness of another use. This protects property owners, residents, the sensitive land, the city, and potential developers from misunderstanding and blame. Today, there may be fewer orchards in our neighborhood, but otherwise nothing about the land has changed except for a few owners. We submit that a dual agriculture developmentally sensitive designation is still the appropriate land designation for our neighborhood. We ask that you support legal buffers between agriculture areas and new development and consider leaving us in agriculture.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Michael Overson, son-in-law of the Smiths and Provo resident. I met and married into the Smith family when I was pursuing my horticultural degree at Utah State University. And all that I've learned in school, I practice in my work in the landscaping industry and experience while working in the orchard. It all circles around the importance of creating and maintaining balance in a system. One of the things that we've learned about farming next to the U.S. Forest Service is the great need to consider each change we make to ensure that we're not throwing something out of whack in the greater habitat. We work diligently to maintain balance in the orchard and to work with nature. Recently, we piped 1,500 feet of what had been the open irrigation ditch. And we did this in order to conserve water, but we made sure to leave an open ditch stretch adjacent to the Forest Service land so that wildlife in that area who depend upon that water still had a place to access it. We use an exacting integrated pest management system whereby we monitor pest life cycles, prevent gestation of many insect pests without the use of spray, so we can limit our exposure to and the use of pesticides. This allows us to utilize mostly organic tree care methods and still produce a top quality fruit product. It requires precise monitoring and exacting practices with careful mitigation for environmental factors and beneficial insects. We know that we have created balance in the orchard because the populations of our most beneficial insects, ladybugs, and bees are thriving year to year. So I'm gonna go off script here. When I moved to Orem in 1992, I remember there was orchards on the side of State Street. And I don't know if you guys have driven in Orem lately, but it sucks. And I don't see how we can widen Canyon Road to, 7 lanes, 3 on each side, 4, and 1 in the middle. So I would ask you to please consider the impact the proposed change to the greater plan will have on the flora, fauna, earth, people, and systems of the balanced environment of our neighborhood.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Alice Overson. I am the daughter of Scott and Jenny Smith. My husband and I live in Provo. I grew up helping on the farm, learning how to work and love the land. After pursuing my culinary arts degree, I began a career in the restaurant industry. However, 3 years ago, I left that world to work full-time with my parents in our family fruit growing business. I've gained an even greater appreciation for those who have made it possible for us to do what we love. I'm grateful for the general plan agricultural designation that covers our property to, quote, provide areas in which agricultural pursuits can be encouraged and supported within the municipality. This designation is intended to protect agricultural uses from encroachment of other development. I'm grateful that our farm property belongs to the APA that helps protect farmers against nuisance lawsuits, unreasonable restrictions from government on farm practices, changes in zoning designations, and roads cutting through their farms. I'm grateful that our ancestors and grandparents left their children some undeveloped property so they would have a choice about how it would bless them. Our parents have chosen to continue to farm and expand their business, allowing us as their children to be a part of that experience. I have absolutely no intention of forcing my parents into retirement and making them quit farming. Quite the opposite, actually. I am highly amused when people ask my parents and I, well, why don't you retire? Or why don't you sell your property? I say, why should they? This is what they do. This is what they are, and this is what we are. There are some places on our farm that are laying fallow at the moment by design. We've been too busy with several exceptionally successful fruit seasons to proceed with what we have planned for them. Since I am running out of time, I'm going to cut this short and say I ask that the decisions that you make regarding this proposed general plan change and our neighborhood plan continue to support and protect our opportunity for that future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Peter Vogel. I'm from Orem. Thank you for giving me this time and helping me to know that this is the time to come up. So I'd just like to let you know that people choose Provo to be near family because of the culture of the city and because of the nature that surrounds it. I personally treasure Provo and Utah Valley as a whole because of the mountains that surround it, and particularly Provo Canyon. I have spent countless hours running in the trails on the foothills, and destroying more of the foothills would be devastating to me. Many of my most treasured memories are from time spent in Provo Canyon and its foothills. This development would violate the beauty of Provo Canyon and its foothills and would destroy the natural beauty of Provo. I recognize that in the actual proposal it specifies that this land is private, but the land that surrounds the proposal would be destroyed by its construction. The outline of the land that this would develop would overlap many of the public trails that stem off Bonneville Shoreline Trail, whether directly or by surrounding the trail's beauty by this development that's proposed. The proposal does not specify specific ways in which the wildlife and plant life would be protected. The construction of houses in much of this area would obliterate the delicate flora and fauna of the area, regardless if it is built on the land that is specified, or whether that land is specified as delicate or not. Building next to delicate land still damages the land, animals, and plants adjacent to it. In the proposal, it was stated that many entrepreneurs leave Provo because Provo does not provide them with the kind of housing that they desire. I argue that entrepreneurs stay because of the natural beauty that Provo provides. I choose to live in Utah Valley because of the natural playground and beauty that it provides. I am fervently opposed to this proposal and beg that any development of the foothills or the land surrounding Provo Canyon be abandoned to maintain the beauty of the mountains and landscape. The part of the proposal that I am most opposed to is the section that belongs to Provo City, and while this council is not able to stop the development that are in Utah County lands, Provo can stop the worst of the development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jeannie Gillespie, 5290 North Canyon Road. Change is hard, but change is inevitable. So I think we need to be realistic about it. Thank you. Here are a few of my thoughts. 1, all of the property we are talking about tonight is private property. Anyone that goes up there to enjoy the open space is trespassing. The proposed project could provide more accesses to the public land to the east of it. 2, There has not been farming done on this property for way over a decade, and I don't see ever being farmed again. Those that want to farm can still farm. It does not change that. 3, I remember when Sherwood Hills looked just like the foothills to the north. There are people living in those foothills now, so why shouldn't the property owners to the north be able to do the same if done in accordance to Provo City specifications? I'm sure if any of the opposers had over 100 acres they wanted to develop, their story would be different. If you were to compare this project to Sherwood Hills, you would see there is more green space, the roads aren't as steep, and it doesn't go as high in elevation. 4, right now, I'm sure the majority of the people living in Provo do not even know that this property is not in Provo City. Whatever is done on this property, no matter whether it is done in the city or the county, it will be a reflection on Provo City because of its location. Anyone would assume it was in Provo City boundaries. It would probably be nice for the city to have a say on how it is developed. 5, I have hiked and biked these foothills, both private and public lands, once or twice a week, year-round, for over 45 years. This change will not stop me from doing that. 6, times change, and I feel this land would be a positive addition to the city if changed from agricultural to low-density residential, so it could be enjoyed by the public instead of it being a private community in the county. Thank you.
Brian Gillespie, 5280 North Canyon Road. Me and really my mom that just spoke are one of the handful of residential users in this area. Our property directly, roughly 2,000 feet of it borders this property. I've felt relatively neutral to it and have been for a while, but as I've found misinformation to the public being provided, I thought it was good for people to understand a few things that have been clarified tonight, which has been great about its private property. There's zero access, zero green space or anything with regards to the public, and any development would really add to that. Adds another access to the trails. Realistically, I don't think, I would really like to know the answer. I don't know if anybody knows, but in Provo or the Wasatch Front, has ever a developer bought a property, wanted to put homes on it, and then later sold it to somebody that made it a farm? Unfortunately, I don't know the answer, but I think I could guess, just because of the scarcity of land in Provo. Ultimately, though, we're talking about a general plan change, which is because of the way the city wanted to do this. We don't know any of the real details, the real impacts, because we don't have a real staff report with regards to the details of the development, because this is just a general plan change. So I urge you to approve the general plan change so that we can get the details, that we can, I think a yes leads to compromise, working with a developer that would accommodate many of the needs and has already done that. So I think working together leads to a better future than saying no and then potentially this thing happening in the county. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Stan Smith, sixth generation like Scott. He's my first cousin. Okay. Part of the proposed development is property that has been in our family for 6 generations. Those that are opposing this property have always been allowed access and enjoy the property as a privilege to walk their dogs, walk through it, jog through it. That's a privilege provided by us, the former property owners. They have never been allowed access as a right. Never. It's always been because okay, fine, come on and go through. No big deal. As a proponent of individual property rights, which we are, I would like to see the North Tentview neighborhood developed in a way that improves the city of Provo and allows property owners freedom to pursue regional improvements. True. I don't like, wait a minute, all you people that stood up because you oppose this, how many of you live north of Foothill Drive? How many? north of Foothill Drive. Okay, there you go. That's people that don't live in our neighborhood saying, I don't want you to develop. I actually had a neighbor come over 3 years ago and say, yo, you can't sell your ground. I don't want you to sell your ground. We just walk our dog up there all the time. And I said, fine, get your fence together and buy it. Simple solution. Lasted the conversation. The majority of the land subject to the pending general plan change is privately owned now. Okay? With the trends of society limited to developable urban land and the economic growth happening in Utah County, it's hard to envision a realistic scenario where this land would ever be used for agriculture again.
Thank you. Sorry, that was the buzzer.
Okay, that's the buzzer. But I just want to say, you've got a gentleman here that's going to foot the cost, put in a beautiful, beautiful place, and let everybody use it. And I can't see, there's no common sense in turning it down.
Thank you.
I'm Russ Lovelace, 20th, 9th generation like the rest of us. I just kind of wanted to second what Stan said. My wife asked me just about 15 minutes ago, she says, do you want your family's land developed? I said, if it's got to be developed, I would love to see it done in an organized, planned, beautiful way. And that's about all I have to say. I'm not going to take my full 2 minutes. But we're not talking about public ground. We're talking about private ground. And if it can be developed in a beautiful, organized, planned way, then I think that's what should be done.
Thank you.
My name is Tony Brown. I live on North Canyon Road. A portion of our acreage adjoins land now owned by Mr. Jones to the north. We've lived at this residence for 10 years and have enjoyed raising a family there. Animals have played an important role in our children's upbringing, especially horses, which we ride from our barn unimpeded up into the foothills above us. I'm grateful to Stan and Jackie Smith, Alan and Sherry Smith, and Gary and Minnie Smith for generously granting us open access to lands that their ancestors homesteaded. In fact, when we put in a small subdivision in front of our house, we named it the Homestead in honor of the Smith family. However, perhaps the Smiths were generous to a fault, because residents living in the Edgemont area came to view the foothills not as private property, but as open space to which they were entitled. In my opinion, herein lies the misunderstanding. When the Smiths sold to Mr. Jones, they transferred the rights associated with private land ownership to him, including the right to develop the land. When designing a concept plan for the Terra development, Mr. Jones rightly deferred to the ordinances governing development of these types of lands. Moreover, in the spirit of the Smith family, he incorporated walking trails into privately owned property. He didn't have to do this, any more so than any one of us has to allow others to trespass on land that we own. So in short, I'm of the opinion that this council should approve the general plan amendment for the proposed development. Provo City has established ordinances that dictate the proper development of such land. And on multiple occasions, Mr. Jones has stated that he will work closely with city engineers to ensure that everything that he does complies with those ordinances and codes associated therewith. Therefore, I suggest that we respect his ownership of the land and continue to work with him in Provo City by offering public comment that contributes to a dialogue of mutual understanding and respect.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Hi, my name is Hunter Gibson, and I have lived in North Provo all my life. I just want to address the necessary and desirable comment that, yes, perhaps a handful of millionaires are desiring to live in this new development, but there are a lot of other people that do not want it to look that way. And I apologize, I'm not very eloquent at speaking. I just ask you to listen to the rest of us and let our voices be heard. And whether or not the trails intersect with the future development or not, when I go running up in the trails that are adjacent to this proposed development, I don't go up there to look at multi-million-dollar houses. I go up there to look at the hills and the mountains, and I would love for that to be unobstructed in the future to continue to enjoy. That's why I trail run. I think there's a very specific group of people who like to trail run, to not be running on State Street or University Avenue with views of houses. And in response to the questions about it, or comments about it being private now, I would just say that private or not, a majority of us love to look at it, and that's free, and we're allowed to do that, and we would love to continue to be able to do that without houses covering up the mountain. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tiffany Plyler. I am also a lifelong resident of Provo. I moved here when I was 8 months old. And I'm also not very eloquent. This is my first time speaking at one of these, and I'm really excited to be here. I think this is so wonderful, and it's been a great opportunity for me to learn so much and to become more involved, and I hope to be more involved in the future. I echo Hunter's sentiments that there's a difference between hiking next to buildings and hiking next to farm open land. It's a big difference, and that difference is emotional, physical, experiential. It encompasses so much. Part of the I think it was the page 28 of the Planning Commission staff report said that the Cascade neighborhood, there would also be 102 luxury condominiums, and if that is wrong or it has changed, I'm so sorry. But if anything like that is the case, that would be similar to hiking next to that is different than hiking and trail running next to other kinds of properties. There's such a big difference in that, and that is why these lands are so desirable, and that's why people move here, to come and experience that section of Bonneville Shoreline Trail there that is unimpeded by homes. There are sections of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail that are more south that you literally hike right next to someone's fence, and that's why we don't hike there. We hike up here because we love to be able to look to our left and look to our right and to not hear people, to not hear to not see homes, to be able to have that space around us. I also would ask, am I allowed to ask a question? I don't know if anyone can answer me now, but if this is something that would get sent to the county, because we don't want this, and I hope that that's something that that you guys have seen enough confirmation that that's not something we want, but is that something that we can then write more emails to the county also saying that we don't want that to be developed through the county?
Thank you. That is true. Yes, you can. Yeah.
Hello. My name is Tamala Blake, and for the past 23 years, I have had the privilege to call Provo my home. I love this town. I love this community, as we heard before earlier tonight. I love the people that I get to call my neighbors. I love the energy here, the safety. I love the mountains that surround us and encircle us with beauty. This is just one of our key points that we have about living in Provo. They seem to be this majestic force that helps us reach our potential. And this is our potential for appreciation of this beautiful earth that we have been given, and the responsibility we have to use and protect what is here and to save it for future generations. I would like to see Provo City have a strong direction of preservation. While we are still able and have time, let's as a city put the brakes on development in irreplaceable natural areas and accelerate our focus on another type of development of preservation and optimizing our green, open, and agriculture lands that we still have and prize as a community. Let's join the movement that is happening across the nation and in Utah even, and let's help our community to be the desirable place to live that it is today. Let's join with Farmington City, which has a vibrant public trail system, a historic preservation committee, and a trail committee. In a recent survey done by our own Parks and Recs, 2 of the 3
Top areas of support found that Provo residents want more interconnected parks, trails, and open space, and the purchase of land to preserve open space and protect the environment. Let's join Draper City, who recently celebrated the conservation of 4,500 acres of open space that had originally been slated for development. This happened just in September of last year. Let's make the right decision today.
Thank you.
My name is Merritt Norton. I'm a lifelong resident of Provo, mostly. And I board my horses near this property that we're talking about today. Spend a lot of time above the property, looking down on the property. I bought a home a few years ago in the Tree Streets neighborhood, and it's on a double lot. And when I bought it, I had no expectation that I was going to be able to develop that second lot because of a lot of issues. And so when you buy property that's got not exactly zoned, and I own commercial property in this county that's not exactly zoned like you want it to be, you're taking a risk. And you're trying to work through that. You don't have an absolute right to develop your property any way you want to, just like I don't with my double lot that I own in the Tree Streets. So I've heard nothing tonight that has made me feel like it's necessary and desirable to change the overlay. What I've heard from Mr. Jones is that we're going to get a road that's going to connect us to Forest Service property. If you've ever been involved, which I'm quite aware of several swaps with Forest Service property, that's a decades-long or longer lifetime process. Ask Robert Redford, ask some of the other people who have worked on those things. The fact that we're going to develop Forest Service property there is a 100-year pipe dream above that. So that road is not helping me to feel like it's necessary and desirable. The water system that may be built up there, I didn't hear anything that made me feel like that was necessary and desirable for Provo City. The roads, not sure it's necessary and desirable. Our economic development, our economic growth is going to be tied to making Provo City a livable city. And we're going to have to go high density. And we're going to need places for people to go and to have some open space. And I think we need to preserve the agricultural overlays in our city. We have very few left. We need to preserve those that are still there. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a visual aid I've asked the Planning Commission to prepare. I'd like my time to not start till that's on the screen. Brian Maxfield prepared it this afternoon. It's from one of the Provo City maps. It's an official map of the city that I think would be beneficial for you to look at. And I wish you'd given more neighborhood chairs or area reps an opportunity to speak earlier, Mr. Chairman.
You have a chance to speak right now.
Thank you. But it's not 5 minutes.
No. How about if we start with the person behind you, and then while they're getting it.
I'm John Benyon, 4450 North, 578 East. Our neighborhood groups have been told that development of the area in question is private land, so development of it is inevitable. But communities have the right to establish conditions and plans for the development of even private land. Our elected officials are being asked to authorize a change that may not be in the best interests of Provo City. I urge the council to not approve the requested change in designation of the land in question from agricultural to residential in preparation for future annexation by the city. The section in the general plan on urban growth says that the protection of some rural, natural, and even wild places in urban areas is something Provo residents seek, almost as a refuge from the urbanization that is taking place all around the city. The question before us is, do we develop our foothills as far as we can to the east, as has been happening in Salt Lake County, or do we say now is the time to stop and think about how to protect remaining foothills for our children and grandchildren to enjoy? Section 8 of the general plan says that open space is necessary in creating a balanced living environment and for maintaining the good and the physical and social strength of the community through active recreational and social interaction with family and neighbors. This section says, quote, Provo citizens have repeatedly expressed through public opinion surveys, bond elections, and RAP funding decisions the need and the desire for additional parks, recreational opportunities, and the retention of open and, in some parts of the city, rural feeling of the community. For these reasons, I urge the City Council to support the citizens in the area and say no to opening the door to changing the designation of this area from agricultural to residential.
Thank you.
My name is Clark Christensen. I live in the Indian Hills area, have for just less than 50 years. Just two comments. Number one, there's a lot said nowadays about quality of life. I know that the quality of my life is always degraded when agricultural land is developed. And in particular, I see much greater need in Provo for land for people of moderate income. By the way, I retired from BYU, so I know very much about moderate income versus high income. And those who have moderate incomes have a much greater need for places to live than those who have high incomes. So, you know how I feel about this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're waiting for him to get something that didn't.
Okay. All right.
He went back to his office.
My name is Wilfred Baird. I've lived in the Edgemont area for over 50 years. And when I moved up there, we had horses and we rode up through the country. And as developments come, then the access stops because you no longer ride horses through where houses are. We have some rights to the Smith Ditch, and I live just south of where Preserve is being made. And I've walked across the land that Preserve owns for 50 years to get the water in Smith Ditch. That property behind me has been sold. We bought our half acre in '58 for $4,000. A half acre back of my house sold for $400,000. There is no way that I would ever be able to live where I live now if I was to start now. But I was talking with the property owner and I said, I've walked across this for 50 years to get my water. Mr. Brotherson told me I could no longer walk there because I had never filed any right-of-way with the city. So if the Groves aren't kind enough to let me get their property, I cannot get to the Smith Ditch to get my water. And that's what I wanted you folks to know, and if there's any way I can get around that. Thank you.
Thank you.
While you're waiting, my name is Susan Porter, and my family bought a condominium in Three Fountains off of Canyon Road 42 years ago. We have loved that area. We have loved it for the openness. We can drive north on Canyon Road and feel almost like we're in the country. That is very therapeutic for people, and if you ask any psychologist, what is a great therapeutic thing? To have open spaces, spaces to breathe, spaces to get out of the city, even if you like living in the city. I would be very concerned about the density of this project that it projects. Huge numbers of people and cars. I don't think Canyon Road can support that. And someone has mentioned the intersection at University Avenue and the north end of Canyon Road. Right now, it's very dangerous. The city needs to provide light there, better light, whether this project goes on or not. But I can see some land needs to be developed, but let's do it at a lesser density. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Kathy Jackson, and I just want to say that when will it stop that we use up all of our wild land, and whether it's privately owned or not? My great-great-great-grandparents or whatever homesteaded up in Montana, and after everything's been said and done, and my generation was pushed to do something about it. We contacted BLM and sold it, but it sold it at a great loss. Not a loss, but we didn't get as much as we could because we wanted it to stay wild. Because we need to have stuff still kept wild. And if you buy property, you can't, unless somebody's made a deal with somebody here and said, hey, I want to do this, and you said, yeah, we'll change it for you. It doesn't matter. When you buy it like it's designated. That's the way it is. And so unless you've, done that, then he knows that. But he's a businessman, and so he knows he can try to push it through. And while everything looks good, I've been here when they've done the several projects. I'm not going to name them. But we've ended up with cars parked everywhere. They've been bad projects. And I know that we've had some developers that have promised, and after Provo City has given them everything, they've gone back on everything because nothing was written. I say if you're going to do this, which I hope you don't, you get every single thing in writing of the promises that are made.
Thank you.
My name is Richard Pratt, and I'm the neighborhood chair of Sherwood Hills neighborhood. And as I look at this project, and I've been in meetings with Bob Jones and all of the neighborhoods neighbors for and against, and I see that we just have two options. We either, if it's denied, then it's going to be developed in the county, and we have no control over what happens. And if we approve it, you approve it, then you have control and you have options and input. That's my input. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Okay, Mr. Roan.
Okay, wait till it's up there. Okay. All right, this is what I wanted to show you. This is an official Provo City map. It's on Provo City's website. Can you make it smaller so we can see the whole area? I think it's important to note this part that's kind of yellow on the map, that's number 6, is in Provo's long-range plan to be annexed to the city, and it has been for 40 years. So where we're talking about his property, it's that little stuff next to the number 5, it's in the dark area, that's what he's talking about changing the general plan to so that he can develop it for residential. This 1,700 plus acres over 3 square miles goes all the way east to Springdale's eastern border. Around the mountain and up the next valley is in Provo's long-range plan to annex and incorporate into the city. I assume that's for a tax base, it's for some utilization other than just to have it like it is now. That wouldn't make any sense. I think as you look down in the blue area where you see the Provo City border, it's interesting to look south of that, just how far east the border of Provo goes that's developed residential land. So what we're looking at here seems to me that from a city council perspective, I'd want to be aware of what our long-range plans are and have been for 4 decades, and how it would fit in with the existing eastern boundary of the city. I was going to say more, but I think these are key points that haven't been raised that you ought to probably take a look at and be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Boyd Blake, Provo City resident. And I guess just to add to that, my point is that we should make decisions today based on information today and not what was designated 40 years ago. I'd put that same map up and say, yes, that's what was done then, but let's take into context what has happened, what is happening today, the discussion today, and let's make good decisions today. And I urge you as a council to step up and play a leadership role in helping us define both through the preservation concept and also the general or the neighborhood plan, a plan that's right for today. I welcome all voices. I've talked to both sides. There's been misinformation on both sides through this. There's more information every meeting I come to. This is my 4th or 5th meeting. There's more information that comes out from both sides. It's very hard and difficult to work with the city and with staff and others to get all the information. We're just residents. We don't know the rules. We're learning, but we certainly, the voice that you've heard and the voice that I represent is that let's plan for the future and preserve what we have. It's okay to say no. It's okay to have a position that you know the lands as they're designated, and I support private property ownership as well. I love the point that's been made, but I appreciate the gentleman that stated earlier, as it's zoned and where it is in the city plan, there's a risk that's involved, and I appreciate that. And my voice is to say no. And if we're going to go fight, with the county, then we'll take this voice and go do that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kissy Watkins, and I'm a resident of the North Provo neighborhood. I love Provo, and I love the Smiths and the Gillespies and the Lovelaces. Did the mill race project get approved by the city council? I looked and looked and looked and figured out, yes, okay. So that is going to give us 1,500 in its 3 stages, 1,500 more residents. It looked like a fantastic, fantastic project. I was thrilled with everything I read about it. It's being built in a place where it fits, where we've got the infrastructure. We talk about needing more infrastructure on the north end of Canyon Road, but I think we have to consider what the effects would be, and can we afford it? Can we afford it when we're struggling over whether we can afford to fix schools that might or might not need to be fixed, and we have a giant cardiac arrest over a bond, one way or the other? I think we need to consider what the impact would be and stick with what's going to work for a long-term plan. Mr. Jones says that he's going to build no matter what, that this is inevitable. And I know that the Provo Foothill Preservation Group is working to try to come up with some kind of a way that this could be worked out in a different way that would be beneficial to him and beneficial to Provo. I have no idea how that will go, but I think that we have to consider if something happens, if this isn't safe and it's built on anyway, and there's a default, who will it fall back on, Utah County or Provo? And then who will have to pay for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public input? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for discussion. Oh, no? Okay. Yes.
Hello, my name is Rachel Luke, and I'm a member of the Rock Canyon neighborhood. I support the general map amendment. I too want and need more information. My support for the development is, in general, is contingent on a few things that I'm still unclear on. First, if Mr. Jones can continue with the county and increase density or close access to the public through a gated community, then I support moving forward. I personally don't think these are empty threats, and we know that the land is already zoned residential with the county. And I want Provo to hold the reins if this development will proceed either way. Secondly, some residents with backgrounds in development have conversed with me over continued infrastructure costs for Terra. Some have told me this project is likely to go bankrupt. I've also heard that the property taxes will not cover the cost to the city. We already have an abandoned gravel pit in this area. We don't need an abandoned housing development. So I would really like to hear the math from the city. And I've tried to clarify where I could, but I don't have those figures. So will this cost more to the city than it's worth? And does the math on the developer's end look feasible? And lastly, I think it's clear that the message has been sent to the city that green space and foothills are desirable, and residents would like to preserve open space when possible. I've heard that the city owns 40 acres adjacent to this development, and I would suggest that we start conserving property that we already own. don't sell it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was told that if I kept my presentation to 10 minutes, that I would be given an opportunity to speak after the group.
Okay, I was not informed of that. Is that?
Yes, what we told him was that he would be available to, again, the message I communicated and was communicated to Mr. Jones was that you would have the opportunity to ask him questions, to answer any of the questions that came up, in a sense of a rebuttal.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I think in fairness, we had to allow Mr. Jones a chance to respond to the many points that have been made and give him some period of time. You decide, 5, 10 minutes, whatever, but I think we owe it to him.
That's fine, as long as we can keep it focused on what we're voting on tonight. That would be appreciated. Thank you.
I'm going to focus on what the neighbors talk about, because that's what you allowed them to talk about.
Well, I want it to be focused. I asked them to focus on what we're voting on tonight, and I'm going to ask the same thing of you. Yeah.
They didn't. So as I was sitting there pondering, about 90% of the negative comments were, oh gosh, we really want to look at that open piece of land. I've said this before publicly, and I'll say it right now. I am happy to sell the property to anybody who wants to look at it. My price is $45 million. I would be happy to stop working towards development and let the neighbors form a group and try and do a GoFundMe page. Or they can get people who are negative to chip in some money, as long as they'd agree to pay my interest on the property for the 2 months that I hesitate. I'd be happy to do that. So anybody who wants to just look at my personal property is welcome to make it their personal property, including the city. I'll sell it to the city. That's how it works in America. Personal property rights. Now let's go to the next step. I don't have an absolute right to develop in Provo City. If Provo City does not want me to annex my property into their city, vote no tonight. I'm going in a different direction. I'm okay with that. It's not the best choice, but I'm okay with it. If Provo City wants me to develop it strictly with the county and do what I need to do with infrastructure, which I can do easily in 2 different ways, I'm going to do it. How many units? If I develop in the county and other property owners develop with me, you're talking about 700 units. I propose 260 in cooperation with Provo City. Okay, that's the difference. Money to the school district obviously will be in Utah County, and that's where the money will go, and they'll attend school in Provo. That's fact. We put in a trail system to allow public access, and part of our requirement with Utah County is that we provide a public access. That's how we get to the 3 units an acre. Process out of sequence. I don't know how this is escaping everybody, but it's already zoned, right? I'm already approved for 3 units an acre on 70% of the property. If Provo City doesn't want to take the other property that's in their city that's owned agricultural, we have several choices that we can pursue over the next couple years while we develop the 70% that's in the county. We're happy to go that route. We think it makes more sense to work with Provo City. We'd love to be development partners, friends, good business associates with Provo City and do it that way. It's the easiest and cheapest way to go and benefits both of us. Okay? Some lady got up, and I'd like to point out that a lot of the people that commented didn't even stay to see what the result is. Do you think they were really concerned? Or do you think they came and did a favor for a friend?
Let's stick to the topic, Mr. Jones.
I'm just saying, didn't even stay. One lady got up and said that she wants to keep the property for tax revenue. How does the city make tax revenue on my private property? Yes, she did. I wrote it down as she said it. There are no rights to my private property for anybody in the city. Okay? Mile High Road is falling down. Everybody knows that's the case. It was developed poorly. The geological studies that need to be made won't be paid for by Provo City. They'll be paid for by me. We'll have to do it as part of the development process. Seismically active, like Sherwood Hills. It's actually not the case in the preliminary studies, but we tried to do a geological study about 8 months ago. We tried to start one, and Provo City restricted it and said no. So the geological study would be done by now, and that wouldn't be a question, like we've done everything else that Provo City asked us to do. We could have pushed that and done the geological study, but we wanted to be cooperative. But all of the preliminary information says we have a different makeup and that we're out of the earthquake zone. It's higher up the mountain where the problem is. I'm happy to work with Scott and Jenny Smith on the border. Happy to work with them. I don't know why that's an issue. Smith Ditch. We own shares in the Smith Ditch. We're going to be using it for our landscaping water source. It's important to us as it is to them, but it's not time to do that yet. We'll get to it once we get to a final site plan, because our site plan as we go through Utah County will be different than what we propose through Provo City. The last lady made really good points. I'm sorry, I don't know her name. Can we continue with the county? Yes, everybody knows that. And are our infrastructure costs realistic? So there's a couple of different ways I could develop it with the county. But we've made an offer to Provo City to do several things that saves them money in infrastructure. Water tanks, improvement and realignment on North Canyon Road, storm sewer, public access parks, and access to our roadways, which are all big, expensive items that normally city residents would have to pay for. We have the money to do it, and we can prove that we do. And of course, in the development process nowadays, as opposed to in the past, you have to prove that up front, and we're happy to do that. I think that's all the things that were brought up, but 90% of the negative reaction was, I want to look at your empty property. Well, buy it from me. I'm very easy to get a hold of. Make me an offer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Jones or for staff? Yes, Mr. Sewell.
I just had a question about the 700 unit number in the county. Can you help me understand where that came from? Because I thought we were talking about 95 acres in the county at 3 units per acre. So
It's 110 in the county, but there are other properties adjacent to mine.
Okay.
So if they joined and we developed theirs, it would take the number up.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't know why they wouldn't.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Maxfield. It was mentioned that engineers would be needed to determine if developmentally sensitive lands could be or should be converted, and yet we are getting kind of disputing accounts about where this overlay is actually relevant to this particular property.
Yeah, I think we're talking about city-county again. For the city, the overlay zone extends down to the west side of this property. It extends along that rising ground, the little bluff area, and that's where it starts and goes eastward from there. The county, where it's critical environmental, that's the county zone that's through that area. So you have the TR5, which includes Mr. Jones' property, and the Forest Service is a CE1 critical environmental zone.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Discussion from the council? Ms. Ellsworth.
I just want to say thank you to Mr. Maxfield. Provo put their most experienced planner on this project, so thanks for your professionalism. I appreciate everyone who came out tonight and to so many meetings. There's a lot of energy, a lot of emotion, a lot of values that have been illustrated, and it's certainly a big process to try to understand when you haven't maybe been involved in the past. And so I appreciate our citizens' commitment and the values that they represented tonight, and in past meetings, and in emails, and on Facebook. That's really appreciated. And I appreciate those folks who have said, you know, we like looking at these properties, we appreciate the aesthetic value and the visual, what would you say there? A visual resource that is available in this part of town. My family has a family farm that's been in the family for 50 years, and folks that live around there like to look at the horses. And but when my grandparents died, that didn't mean that the folks who lived around there got to determine what the family did with that property, and it was ultimately sold. And it's certainly a nice view, and that's a pleasant, a pleasant property to live by. But it's owned by someone else, and ultimately I honor private property rights. And then I also respect the developers' efforts in this project, and I understand that developers, every month that they're going through this process, they're paying interest, a substantial amount of interest on an investment, and the more we draw it out, the more money they're paying. But ultimately, I'm not in favor of this project, this general plan amendment. I think it is not healthy for the habitat, for the ecology that is in that area, and I don't think that that the homes built there would be safe from wildfires or hydrological events.
Thank you. I'd like to make a few comments, especially because I'm involved with the Foothills Protection Committee that was formed about a year and a half ago, initially in response to the gravel pit that exists close to this area near the mouth of the canyon. But as we started that discussion, we became very aware that we didn't have sufficient ordinances or clarity in our ordinances and specificity in our ordinances to adequately protect the foothills, whatever areas of the foothills that remain for development, including everything that we're talking about here, but all the way down to, the southeastern part of the city and into Provo Canyon. And as we began to investigate this issue, we learned about the Salt Lake County Foothills Ordinance that we saw it's been around for a long time. It's a very, very thorough, very clear. I think it's very helpful for developers. I think it's very helpful for the community because it really outlines in a great amount of detail and clarity what should be considered whenever a proposal for development comes forward, and hopefully that makes the decision a little easier and more responsible. Because if you develop, as has been said many times tonight, if you develop an area like this, and you don't do it right, the cost to the city and to the residents is pretty significant, and of course to the developer. So I think it's in the interest of all parties to be very clear about what we want and what we don't want. And so we're in the middle of that process, and it's taken a while. It's taken longer than I would have liked, but we're still in that process. And I've made it clear from the very beginning that I didn't want to make a decision about this until that ordinance was ready and ready to go. And in the meantime, of course, the neighborhood plan discussion has emerged as another needed component of this to make sure that we're getting community input on these kinds of questions, and especially since this is, as has been pointed out, one of the remaining areas in the foothills that is less developed than others. I think we need to be especially careful because the risk to health and safety and general welfare is much higher if we get it wrong. And so I've just, as I look at the general plan is not an adequate document for this kind of proposal in a lot of ways, because the general plan, as has been pointed out by the Planning Commission, is maybe due for an update. But moreover, it's a general plan, it's not a specific plan, and so there's a lot of things in there that are conflicting, or at least they're competing visions of what's important, competing values. It has sentences in there like the city should work effectively and as a city with other government agencies and private organizations to protect, preserve, and restore its natural resources in the surrounding mountains, canyons, foothills, wetlands, shorelines, riverbanks, and associated wildlife corridors, agricultural lands, and in all city parks, and develop a citywide culture of proactive stewardship of the ecological integrity of these resources. I'm familiar with that sentence because I helped write it 10 years ago, and I'm very passionate about what that stands for. And at the same time, the general plan says, encourage new developments to create a sense of identity and belonging in their designs, fencing, entrances, landscaping, etc. And it also says we should improve the access and recreational uses of the Wasatch Mountains east of Provo, and especially Provo, Slate, and Rock Canyons. My point is that these are all important values. No one here is interested in disrespecting property rights. No one here is interested in destroying natural resources that we want to preserve for future generations. And precisely for that reason, I think we need to do it right. And by doing it right, I think we can't let the cart go before the horse. I appreciate that Mr. Jones has invested an enormous amount of money, and I appreciate that it's frustrating to have to wait, but it is important to us to do this right, and it would certainly not be helpful, to feel like, well, if we don't approve this now, it's going to turn into something that we don't want, and it's going to happen in county land. It's frankly not very helpful, Mr. Jones, to not know what actually are the specifics of your conversation with the county. Unless and until I can see something specific from the county that is a commitment that they're willing to go forward with this, I'm not willing to be rushing what we're trying to do as a council because of that possible outcome. So I think it would be actually irresponsible of us as a council to do such a thing. I hope Mr. Jones is serious about wanting to work with Provo and continue to work with Provo. I've heard mixed messages and things he said tonight about how serious he is, however. But I'm content to wait until we're done with Foothills Ordinance. I'm content to wait until we get more input on a neighborhood plan. And then, and if there is a proposal that we can look at, we'll be confident that we can be looking at it with our eyes wide open and everybody confident that we've got the right standards and right expectations about these very important areas of our city. And we won't be pushed into it, but we'll be actually proactively envisioning it and building toward it. And I want to say too that these aren't wildlands, to be technical about this, right? But in fact, a lot of areas in the foothills, I used to live near Slate Canyon, I live near Rock Canyon, and I've spent as much time as anybody in this area and on the other side of the canyon in the Orem foothills. And these areas need restoration. They don't need just preservation. If you're going to get serious about having public access to areas like this, maybe we do as a city need to be thinking about ways to guarantee that access that have been alluded to this evening. But my point is that you have to work. It is a form of development, as I think someone said tonight, to even protect something. You don't just leave it alone. Because a lot of those areas in the foothills have already been degraded by old mining projects and old roads going nowhere, and so there's definitely work for us to do as a city, and I'm committed to doing it. So I would encourage my fellow council members to deny this request for an amendment and allow us as a city council to do our due diligence with these important questions. And like I say, if and when we come back to a further discussion, we can entertain it at that point. Mr. Shipley.
I don't know that I can add a lot to that. I think that was eloquent, and I appreciate Councillor Hanley's comments there. I'll be brief. I echo a lot of what the councilman just said, and I guess I'm just not convinced or persuaded that we're talking about something that's necessary or desirable at this point, period. I think I support development. I support growth. I don't think anybody here is anti-development. That's not what this is about. I think what we are about is being prudent about when we make decisions and why we make them. And to say that at this point we have enough information to be persuaded that this is something that is necessary or desirable, I think would not be prudent. I think we need more information. I think we need more context. I think we need more guidelines and rules to create policy from and decide from. And so because of that, I think I'm not in support of this, and I would encourage our fellow councilors to consider that even if they are in support of something like this eventually, that it makes sense to have a construct to operate in before we make decisions like this. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Harding.
In the spirit of the request earlier to not repeat points that have already been made, I'll be very brief, because I agree with much of what has already been discussed among the councilors. Provo City does have an adopted policy and plans governing governing this area, and that in part is included in the general plan, which includes the land use designations that currently exist. We have a proposal to make changes to that designation. It's a proposal to change the adopted policy and plans of the city, and I feel that when that level of change is requested for our policies and plans, we need to go through the proper public process. Our general plan is out of date. It needs to be updated, and frankly, I think there are aspects that need to be changed about the policy and plans that govern this area, but I don't think it's appropriate to do that tonight and without going through a more robust public process. So I'll be voting to deny this request.
Any other comments from City Council? Mr. Hoban.
Sometimes you say what everybody's thinking, and sometimes you say what nobody's thinking. And I want to say something kind of in defense of Mr. Jones, that, you know, a lot of people tell me you're a jerk, and yeah, I haven't seen that, but you know, it's not for me to judge. I haven't interacted with you enough. But what I do see is a capitalist, and I think sometimes capitalists come across as a little rough around the edges, but Provo needs capitalists. You know, the difference, I guess, between a jerk and a capitalist is a jerk takes your parking spot and your girlfriend, and a capitalist just takes your money, but you give it willfully, because you provide benefit, you provide value to the community around you. And Provo needs capitalists, and we need developers willing to take chances. Each of our homes was built by a developer. The retail and the restaurants that we enjoy were built by developers, and I think it's important to keep in mind that you know, developers are literally building the future of Provo. So go out and find a developer today and give him a hug. Maybe you don't want to give him a hug, but there's one around probably. I guess specifically in regards to this specific issue in front of us, you know, I try to keep my emotions in check. I support property rights until my neighbor wants to start a junkyard in his front yard, and I support you know, conserving the environment as long as the land and the big box store in my home's been developed first. And I think that you know, it's important for us to, you know, we're complex people as humans, and I think this is a complex issue, and so I want to look at this logically and to echo some of the things that my counterparts here have said, I think the logical approach to this is to not put the cart before the horse, as you said, Mr. Hanley, and to go about this the right way and methodically, and make sure we take the steps to plan for the long term of Provo's future. And so because of that, I also would be in consensus with some others here on the council that it's not the right time, and so can't support it at this time.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yeah, likewise, I'll be brief. No sense rehearsing everything that's been said. I particularly feel to echo the articulate comments of our chairman. I appreciate that very much. I summarize my feelings pretty much. I really don't know if there's a possibility of an acceptable compromise between the strongly held opposing views that have been expressed tonight. I hold out hope that that may be possible. I certainly want to acknowledge the fact that Mr. Jones has volunteered a variety of concessions that have to be recognized and appreciated for what they are. But I do think that this just requires more time, particularly with the foothill protection ordinance and maybe some geological studies as well, but I'm just not comfortable approving the amendment at this time.
Thank you. Mr. Sewell.
I'd first like to express appreciation to be a part of this public process. This is an amazing process. I appreciate that we have developers and investors that want to invest in Provo. And I appreciate that we have citizens who are passionate and concerned about the way that Provo develops, and that we've had so many communicate with us about that. I appreciated what Chair Chair Handley said about the Foothills Protection Committee. It's been my privilege to serve with him on that. I feel a sense of urgency. There's a lot of public interest in this, and I hope we can move that along as quickly and efficiently as we can. If I look only at the question tonight, which to me would be, am I comfortable voting that all of this land in question be designated for residential use? I don't feel like I'm ready to say that because of the ongoing work that we're doing to try to define what areas should be protected. But I do have a worry with what's been talked about with the county. I mean, is it possible that we're going to get a result that we're going to like even less with respect to foothills protection if it goes that direction? So I feel like I need to vote no, because strictly on the basis of the question before us, but I hope that's not interpreted as shutting the door to more communication and trying to figure something out that would protect our foothills and still allow development in appropriate places. So anyway, I'll be voting no as well.
All right. I didn't hear anyone say so, but let me just ask again, does any council member desire to continue this item to the next council meeting? Okay. If not, we'll call for a vote on, yes, Mr. Harding.
If I may, really quickly before that, I wanted to second the thought that was shared, that developers are absolutely critical for our built environment. You know, even if your great-grandparents built their house, at that point your grandparents were developers, and everything we have in our built environment in Provo was built by a developer. Absolutely critical, and you know, we need to appreciate that. It does not mean that everything that is proposed is right for the community, and that's why we've been elected to consider these proposals as they come forward. But I wanted to express that Provo is looking for good partners to help develop and continue to develop the community.
Thank you. All right, so I will call for a vote on the implied motion, and the implied motion is, well, the vote would be in favor of an ordinance amending the general plan designation of approximately 151 acres, generally located between 300 East and 1,000 East and between 4,800 North and 6,000 North from agriculture to residential. All in favor? All opposed? It is unanimous in opposition. So that, I think, means that if there is no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight.